This project became significantly larger than what I had expected. Reason being is that I simply found it very easy to keep writing because, well, I obviously have a lot to say about this game. I understand that not everybody will appreciate such a long video, so if I had to recommend only one section of it, it would be the story recap and analysis. Since I have been quite literally trained to analyze stories, it's probably the strongest aspect of the video. I would also draw your attention to the timestamps in the description that will lead you to any other section, including past this opening statement straight into the combat section, which is the timestamp that is also being displayed right here on screen. Also, keep in mind that watching this video in one sitting isn't mandatory. You can watch one section or two, leave, and then come back and watch a few more. Or you could not watch it at all and play this in the background while you play a game, are at work, or are trying to fall asleep. I know this is very obvious stuff to say, but not everybody understands the way you're supposed to engage with this kind of content. Perhaps the reason why I was able to write so much about this game is because I find that this series is often misunderstood. Its gameplay is often characterized as substanceless button mashing, and its story and characters as simplistic and juvenile. I think that's unfair, obviously. It would be like calling Metal Gear Rising a bunch of flippy-dippy anime crap. Nobody that would say such a thing could do so and get away with it, but it seems to be the norm for God of War. I will try to disprove these notions to the best of my ability. Although very sparsely, I will bring up and directly address claims made in other videos on God of War, mainly being King K's own review of the game and Fat Brett's video on how God of War has matured. I don't mean any ill will towards either of them, but I vehemently disagree with a lot of what they have to say. Speaking of the PS2, let me address something right off the bat. I am reviewing the original version for this video, and I'm playing off of a real PS2, I'm not emulating it. So the footage may not look as sharp as other people's footage. Also, the aspect ratio. It's in 4:3. There is a widescreen option, but I didn't use it for two reasons. One is that I've used it before, and I feel like the video quality is made worse when I use it. Things appear to be muddy at times. And two is because I want to present the cutscenes without any cropping at all, since the PS3 version crops the top and bottom of the screen. There are a few differences in the PS2 version and the PS3 version, making the PS2 original the superior version in terms of game mechanics, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm also a massive Puritan, so I try and do stuff as authentically as I can when possible. I played this game on very hard to prove a point because a lot of people will say that you can just do the same combos over and over and over again to get by. Funny enough, I've noticed that a lot of those people that say that usually are playing on easy or normal. Interesting. God of War is possibly most well described as a hack and slash game. Some people might even throw in the stylish prefix to that. I'm completely fine with using either one. Some people will probably disagree with the stylish part, but we don't really care about that. It's well known that the game was inspired in part by Devil May Cry, but it also takes elements from games like Ico and Prince of Persia. Hell, Onimusha is really the direct inspiration, since that's the game that made David Jaffe, the director, want to make something similar with the Greek mythology setting. Regardless, some Devil May Cry fans get very salty when you compare the two, viewing God of War as the inferior, watered-down copycat that got way more attention than the superior original product. Hey, who put these Elder Scrolls graphics on my screen? Get the hell out of here. Now, the only Devil May Cry game I've played is 2? Yeah, if you know, you know. But if you don't know, 2 is the worst game ever, and well, God of War 2 is great, so you know, maybe we shouldn't start pointing fingers, you know? This game also takes inspiration from The Legend of Zelda, which at first viewing might not be that obvious, but if you think about it, both games have magic, temples, stiff climbing, pushing of blocks, spinning of rooms, undead enemies, secrets in chests, a big sword, collectibles that will grant you upgrades, and a combat system and enemy designs that most people misunderstand. God of War's combat consists of mashing the square button to get Kratos to do basic combos that can easily disable every enemy type you run into. Right? It's pretty sad how many people believe this to be the case, simply because that's the meme that got spread around. Look up a review on YouTube, and you'll most likely find someone telling you that the combat isn't worth engaging with because of how easy things are. Funny enough, I've never seen anybody go out of their way to play this on the hardest difficulty, like I have. That would really bring the point home and be the nail in the coffin, right? If the game really is that simple, then show us how simple its most difficult challenge really is.
One thing about God of War combat that pisses fans off is whenever someone calls it casual or mashy. But I mean functionally. Now, you never have to optimize your combos unless you're going for higher difficulties.
I mean, he's technically not wrong. But it begs the question, if you're aware of the difference in between the difficulty settings, why are you playing on the one you're playing on and not the other one? Here's a thought experiment. If you're playing a game and you find it to be too easy, and there's a difficulty slider or option, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep playing as is? Or are you going to turn the difficulty up? Now, to be fair, God of War doesn't have this option mid-game. You can only choose it at the very start of a new game, or if you die too many times, then the game will suggest playing on easy. So sure, you could play the game on normal and hit every enemy twice before rolling out of the way every single time, but if you don't do that, if you actually try to go on the offensive and rack up the hit counter, the game will give you a tangible reward that directly affects gameplay. This game, hell, the whole original trilogy really, is in this strange limbo of criticism. It gets called all style, no substance, brain dead, but it also has been said to have cheap enemies that make the game frustrating, which in this case is just the lemming way of saying it makes you think about what you're doing. Hey, maybe try blocking? Maybe try the right analog stick?
No matter how many different enemy types they introduced, I often found myself falling into the comfortable button spam to coast through fights, which for the most part felt serviceable. Upgrading your weapons and gaining new combos can only take you so far when those combos can be safely spammed without much thought.
Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why playing on a difficulty that makes enemies do this kind of damage instead of this kind would allow you to play while like half asleep. Alright, let's test this one out. I'm just gonna spam light attack of these next two clips. I want you to try to tell which is being played on very hard and which is being played on easy. If you just don't want to think about it and see Kratos do cool things on screen, then yeah, play on an easier difficulty. It's a legitimate way of playing the game, that's why there's an easy mode at all. But don't talk about how the game doesn't require thought on the player's end, how the enemies are mostly the same, and how you just kinda spam the buttons to get by, while also showing footage of you rarely even trying to parry. Seriously, look at my footage, and look at his. I like King K, he makes pretty good videos. This one is probably his worst. I think the problem that most people run into is that they view not being able to approach an encounter in any way possible as limiting. A limitation is obviously a bad thing in every situation ever, so the fact that I can't carelessly jump while fighting the Medusa because I might be petrified mid-air and die instantly is a bad thing, right? And no, that's not a straw man, that's a legitimate argument.
Getting destroyed while you're stoned results in an instant kill, a nuisance in and of itself, but when you're just jumping around trying to avoid the big stoner beam, it feels like a huge slap in the face that you die instantly with zero recourse.
I'll address this once we get to the enemy section of the video. Despite the fact that it has been objectively proven that spamming the same 3-button combos over and over and over again is not the most effective way to deal with enemies, people will still regurgitate the misconception that this game's combat is for babies. Now, I'm not an expert or anything, and there are plenty of other people that could explain this way better than me, but I'm gonna do my best here. First off, we have some pretty interesting weapons here, the Blades of Chaos. These blades are attached to chains that you swing around at your enemies. Pretty unique idea. Nobody played Rhaegar. Game feels pretty responsive, and it looks nice. Attacks chain together well enough. The chains give a little distance between you and the enemy. Not a lot, but enough where you should be able to preemptively act before getting attacked. You start off with pretty basic stuff. A light and heavy attack, a grab, and a block that doesn't require you to be facing the attack. This might seem like a bad thing, but it doesn't really bother me for some reason. I think facing the enemies to block their attacks would result in nobody even trying to block and just rolling out of the way. There's also no lock-on feature, so there's no quick way of facing the enemy. Killing enemies grants you experience in the form of red orbs. Killing certain enemies via QTE will grant you different kinds of orbs. The Medusa will give off blue orbs, which will refill your magic, and the Minotaur will give off green ones, which will refill your health. It's important to note that doing this will only grant you blue or green orbs, and not red ones at all, unless you're playing the PS2 version. For some reason, this was removed from the PS3 version. But here, if you get a 10 or more hit combo before finishing the enemy with a QTE, you will be granted a Brutal kill, which gives you 20 red orbs. Other enemies that don't have a QTE kill will give you a Ruthless kill if you kill them by throwing them or doing a grab execution, which will give you 10 orbs. This is a way in which the game rewards smart play. You get more orbs this way. Getting more orbs means you can upgrade your stuff faster. The more upgrades you have, the more damage you do. You're not really going to notice this if you're just square triangling everything. Geez, perhaps that's not the most optimal way to play the game. This is a feature that only appears in this game. It was removed in the second game and replaced with the inferior system of getting a special kill for every QTE kill you do, no matter the hit counter. You will get a small amount of orbs from the hit counter alone though. Hitting certain milestones will grant you the orbs without you even needing to kill anybody. So it's still a good idea in general to keep the hit counter as high as possible. It's just that in the original release, this was even greater so. Now, it isn't all good. The orbs appear in a very inconsistent or just not intuitive way throughout the game. Sometimes you can get orbs from killing an enemy this way, but most of the time it won't work. Killing an enemy from afar will not give you their orbs unless you are close enough to collect them, even if there's no real way of reaching them. Getting orbs during wall combat is almost impossible, since they will often fall to their death and take their potential orbs with them, forcing you to stop and grab the enemies instead, which is a death sentence in most cases. These enemies don't give off any red orbs when they are shattered, which will usually give you 15. Knocking enemies out of bounds won't get you any orbs, which is fine, that's fair. The game gives you an option of a quick kill but no reward, or taking longer to finish the fight but getting something out of it. That's great. What about this though? I was told by Zesty that this happens because the enemies are falling out of bounds as I knock them off the wall. If that is what is happening here, well that's dumb. Why is the falling animation knocking them out of bounds? It's not any faster to kill them this way, so I'm just being punished for not individually grabbing every enemy off the wall here, which would be impossible by the way since you don't get invincibility frames while grabbing enemies on the wall. I think it's more likely the case that the game is simply not programmed to give off red orbs when an enemy is on the wall and you kill them with the blades. Now Zesty knows a whole lot more about the game than I do since he hangs around some of the OGs in the community that have looked under the hood of the game. Regardless of which one this is though, this is just bad design. Wall combat in general is bad. You either take a long time slashing at enemies, or you grab them to take them out quicker but at your own risk. Or you do what most people do. Ignore it entirely. Just jump past as many enemies as you can. It's easier not to engage with the system, which sucks. Rope combat isn't great either. It's way too easy to get pot-shotted here. Doing this seems to be the most viable option to avoid damage, which is kinda lame. Side note, sometimes you'll get a single green orb from enemies, and I have no idea how or why. There is a red orb meter on your HUD. It will fill up once you hit 300 orbs. The number next to it will then increase by 1. I have no idea why they decided to represent your total orbs in this way, since it's not like this number really means anything to the player. You can just go and see the actual number in the inventory screen. Your upgrades are measured by the actual number and not this other number on the HUD. It really seems like something that was added early on in development and that just never got changed for some reason. You can upgrade your blades 5 times, each time making them more powerful and unlocking new moves that you can activate by holding the block button and hitting one of the face buttons on the controller. These moves are fairly powerful, but they are also automated to the point where if you miss with them, you'll be punished for it, since there's no way of canceling the animation. Some are shorter than others, but you can't just spam these without consequences, despite people saying that you can. I will cover these in order. Guard plus X gives us Apollo's Ascension, a very simple attack that will bring both you and the enemy into the air. These kinds of moves have 2 iterations, a grounded version and an aerial version. This is the only case where one leads into the other. Apollo's Offensive is the second part of the equation. It's a decent attack on its own. The last part can bounce the enemy off the ground and back into the repeating attack. You can do this with almost every enemy in the game. Yeah, even these guys. Didn't expect that. It's a pretty lengthy animation compared to the others in the game, but you aren't in that much danger while in the air. This will force the player to learn air combat, or at the very least make them aware of its existence, which is a good and a bad thing, but I'll say that for way later. This is a good move for beginners. It's safer to use repeatedly than some of the other ones, yet you can't just spam it because there are enemies that will block it and punish its use. Seriously, why can you do this to the Cerberus though? Next we have L1 and Square, or Cyclone of Chaos. This attack sucks. It has about a half a second wind up, then Kratos does this little spin. It has no punch at all, no impact. It leaves you wide open to be attacked during the wind up animation, the attack itself, and the small pause afterwards. More than half of the time I ended up using this attack, it was by accident, since you can still activate this move even if you're not holding the block button. If Kratos is still in his blocking pose, or is even in the process of unblocking, hitting square, or any other of the face buttons for that matter, will make you do the corresponding move. The air version is the same thing, and although I do find it a little more useful, especially for increasing the hit counter, it still isn't great. This might be the weakest of these moves. Not in terms of actual damage, just in terms of how bad it is. Guard and Triangle gives you Rising Helios, a heavy slam attack that gets turned into this vertical spin while in the air. The biggest downside here is the recovery animation. It is a strong attack, so it makes sense from a design perspective, but there really isn't a reason to use this attack over the normal heavy slam you can do. The air version, Falling Helios, has a similar lack of punch problem that the Cyclone of Chaos has. It also just kind of stops, which looks goofy. Lastly, we have Guard and Circle, which is Lance of the Furies. If I'm being honest, this is probably the least useful one, but I kinda like it. I really only use it in the air. Using it on the ground leaves you way too open to attacks. The blast is dependent on how long you hold the button for. If you just tap it, you'll do a short burst that really does nothing. Hold it though, and you might actually blow enemies away from you. You better hope that this actually happens, because like the last attack, the recovery animation is pretty long, and is actually longer if you use it in the air than if you just use it on the ground. Be careful with this one. It's kind of fun, but ultimately, it's the most gimmicky one. Now on to normal moves. Hitting light attack 6 times results in this basic string that ends with a slash that is good for knocking enemies away from you and into each other. Changing the last input to be a triangle will make you do this heavy slam at the end, which is better than the slam you get if you just hit square square triangle. Speaking of which, square square triangle, also known as Plume of Prometheus. This is often thought of as the most effective move in the game by some people, both in terms of how easy it is to execute and its damage. Like I mentioned before though, Mr. Wright has made a hefty video on the subject, showing that it's not the best way to approach combat, giving you faster alternative strategies that work much better. I'll get into enemies in a bit, but I try to stunlock some enemies with this move as I've seen others do in future games, and it seems like enemies have certain uninterruptible animations. So no, you can't just spam the move to win the game. It does have its uses like for crowd control, but it's definitely not the only thing you should be doing. 3 heavy attacks is called Spirit of Hercules, but it's faster to do a light attack before the first heavy attack. Valor of Hercules is the same thing, but with a light attack as the third input. Hermes Rush is the name of the shoulder bash you can do by hitting R1. Later on you unlock the extended version, which allows you to hit the button 3 times to do this pretty basic move. Although tapping it twice and then hitting either square or triangle will result in either a slash or a slam. You can also use R1 in the air for a ground stomp. I never use this move. I've seen people use it to kill enemies really quickly when they're in the Rage of the Gods mode. However, the average player just doesn't have much use for this move. Might of Hercules is done by hitting square once and hitting it again and holding it. A better version though is hitting square 3 times and holding the third input. This move is almost required for the final combat section of the game. Achilles Flip is a move you can do out of a roll by hitting X. It is really good for getting enemies in the air. I really like this move, but I barely use it during the Let's Play. It just has this fluidity to it that feels really great, and it's pretty quick, which is a good thing for getting the jump on enemies. Speaking of out of roll, hitting triangle after rolling is my favorite way to keep up the damage while also moving around the enemies. It's the same quick version of heavy attack if you do a light attack prior, but in this case you're also moving out of harm's way, so I prefer to do it this way. This is also an easy way to do Spirit. Orion's Harpoon is when the enemy is in the air, you are on the ground, and you hit the circle button. I'll get into why this option is way better than what you might think in a bit. You can also redirect enemies while they are in mid-air, which is something that you cannot do in later games. It's also pretty useful for quickly getting rid of some enemies if they are close enough to the boundary. Blocking at the right time will parry the attack, and after some upgrades, you can get a counter-attack option. If you are familiar with the other games in the series, you might be surprised to know that the counter-attack doesn't give you any invincibility frames. If you decide to counter, you best be sure you aren't getting hit. You can either do a slam or a slash as the counter. Here you sadly can't counter ranged attacks like you can in future games. Despite the lack of invincibility, I really like this option, maybe even a little more than the ones to come in future entries. The ability to knock enemies into each other with the slash is great. It's really wide in its coverage. Some people might think that future games fix this problem of not granting invincibility frames, but I honestly prefer it this way, from a design perspective at least. It's just too easy to parry enemies' attacks. I don't think invincibility should be a reward for such an easy thing to do. Forcing the player to act in a more cautious manner isn't a bad thing. Now that being said though, because of this, a lot of the times it is just better to keep holding block and not actually attack. Okay, I just alluded to it, might as well bring it up now. It's a pretty big meme at this point in the God of War community to bring it up, but yes, we got collisions. To put it simply, the higher the difficulty you play on, the more damage enemies will deal to each other when they are knocked into one another. This is because in higher difficulties, these enemies deal more damage, which is how damage from collisions is calculated. So if you're playing on easy, don't really worry about it. Hard or very hard though, and they are definitely worth using. We have 2 iterations here, which have been dubbed half and full collisions by the community. Halves don't do as much damage, and are done when the enemies are knocked back into each other. Full collisions are the full damage and are done when they are directly thrown by the player. I don't remember if Orion's Harpoon is a half or a full collision, but it doesn't really matter. Just make sure that enemies are clashing into each other as much as possible. This isn't something the game tells you, and that's because I'm not sure the developers were even thinking about how difficulty would affect this mechanic. At least I don't think they did. Let's talk about the secondary weapon in the game, the Blade of Artemis. This weapon is often said to be introduced too late into the game, at which point the player is already well accustomed to the Blades of Chaos, and introducing a new, short-range weapon doesn't really jive well with most players. I agreed with this back when I first played the game in 2015, but man, something clicked when I played the game again last year. This is my favorite secondary weapon in the original trilogy, maybe other than the Claws of Hades from 3. The impact of the blade feels great. I think it's the slight stutter that happens when it makes impact that does it for me. Similar to the Blades of Chaos, we get special moves when combining block and the other face buttons. We got Wrath, Revenge, Ascension, and Retribution of Artemis. Wrath is a multi-hit slash. Revenge is a spin, but it is cooler than the Cyclone of Chaos. Ascension is good for getting enemies and yourself in the air, and while in the air you can hit triangle to slam down on them. The only one that sucks is Retribution, since it's just too slow to use most of the time. The circle button goes from being your grab to being another attack option when used normally. Although plenty of times I would still end up grabbing enemies even though I had this weapon out, so it's kind of finicky. I'm not even sure if I have footage of this, but when the Minotaur has the circle prompt over their head, you can use this weapon to decapitate them instead of doing the normal QTE. But I'm pretty sure at one point I still ended up doing the normal QTE, even though I had the weapon selected. You can mix up the 3 face buttons to chain attacks in a more varied way than you can with the blades. That being said though, you don't really need to, and I never did. The shoulder dash turns into a pretty useful thrust. You don't move as far when doing it though, but it's really good for taking out enemies. I didn't use this weapon too much during the Let's Play, but that's mainly because I still think it's harder to use than the Blades of Chaos. I think what really holds this weapon back is a lack of a parry option. Once an enemy starts to attack you, all you can really do is block until the enemy stops. Blocking isn't really that easy to do with this weapon in general because it seems like the actual blocking doesn't happen when the blocking happens on screen, like it's delayed. It's kind of hard to tell and you might not even notice it while playing, but looking over the footage, this is indeed a thing. This doesn't mean the weapon is useless like most people like to say. It's pretty strong. If I had a petrified enemy that I needed to crush, I would usually switch to it. And you can knock enemies out of bounds fairly easily with this thing. I believe the OGs call it the home run technique. I never actually ended up doing it, but I did do this. Yeah, fuck off. I don't know if this is actually true or it's just a coincidence, but looking over the footage, I seem to have an easier time fighting the Minotaurs with this weapon, especially towards the end of the game. They seem to be staggered a lot more easily by it than the Blades of Chaos. What I'm going to talk about now can apply to almost any game, really. How valid is it to take exploits into consideration when reviewing a game's mechanics? It's clearly something unintentional, but at the same time deliberately placed there by the people who made the game. Is it fair to consider this part of the game design then? The exploit we're going to be talking about is what fans have dubbed tricking. When summoning the Blade of Artemis, Kratos is invulnerable to all damage until the animation is concluded. So players use this to their advantage to avoid damage from enemies with ease. Most players seem to do this by tapping the magic button while selecting Zeus's Fury. The act of putting away the bolt will resummon the blade and thus replay the wanted animation. Personally, I like summoning the blade the normal way to trick, which is done by pressing L1 and R1 at the same time. I prefer to do it this way since in the other case, the tricking happens when you let go of the magic button, and not when you press it. It just makes more sense in my brain to hit a button to do a thing, instead of letting go of a button to do a thing. Now, is this a bad thing? Should I criticize the game for allowing the player to avoid damage in such an easy way? Does this completely break the game? Well, no, I don't think so. It's not something that you can just spam and get away with. There is a modicum of timing and skill involved. Get it wrong and you're going to be punished by the enemy. Also, normal parrying is just as easy, if not even easier. And in some situations, it's the more desired option for its counterattack. Also, the fact that most people don't even know this is a thing goes to show that this isn't a glaring problem. The casual player won't be able to tell this is even in the game, let alone be able to use it effectively. Now, is this a good thing? Should I praise the game for allowing the player to avoid damage with this weapon, for having a greater knowledge of how the game works? Well, no, I don't think so. The thing that makes this an exploit and not a glitch is the fact that the invincibility frames were intentional, but the developers did not intend for you to use them to avoid damage. I think. There is a possibility that they left this in the game knowing that players could take advantage of this, but they might have also thought that nobody would even notice. Or maybe they themselves didn't even think of using them in this way. I believe the game gives you iframes during the animation so that you wouldn't be interrupted by enemies' attacks during it, which might have cancelled you switching weapons. I have no proof of this just seems like the most logical thing to me. Are exploits fair game? Are they as legitimate as being able to do a quick heavy attack after a roll, for example? Are they on the same level as glitches, like the infinite magic glitch? I think it's dependent on the exploit, and in this case, I don't think it negatively affects the gaming experience enough for me to criticize it really. Like I mentioned, it's just as easy to parry attacks. And for those attacks that you can't parry, it's just as easy to roll out of harm's way. It's also kind of fun to do. Pulling it off successfully always feels good, while missing your mark will make you feel like a big idiot. All these options combined together give the player the ability to flow through combat in a multitude of ways. I'm not very good at it. I am better now than when I started my Let's Play, but I don't think I utilized all these options to the fullest. Like, looking back, I often wonder why I didn't do Orion's Harpoon on enemies after doing moves like these, or why I did the full 5 light attacks and then a heavy attack for this plume when I could have just easily done the 3 heavy version, or why I didn't use the Blade of Artemis more, or why I didn't use Medusa's Gaze more, or whatever it might be. Regardless, all these moves have a purpose and should not be ignored. They're also pretty fun, which, yeah, is a pretty subjective thing, I guess. But being able to use these moves in the right situation feels great. Spamming square, square, triangle? Yeah, not so much. The next section is also combat related, and is essentially a continuation of this one, especially the enemy section, since it's essentially the other half of this equation here. I mentioned magic already, so let's get into it. First we have Poseidon's Rage, one of the best magic attacks in the game. It starts off as a fairly simple AoE attack, but after the first upgrade it noticeably does more damage, allowing you to mash circle to increase the damage and longevity. It also increases the range a bit. And then when it is fully upgraded, it annihilates enemies. Although this is very good, I did notice that you're not actually invulnerable while in this state, because I got shot out of it a few times. This is personally my favorite of the game. Getting it first doesn't take away from the other magic attacks though. They still have their uses, like Medusa's Gaze. You get her head and can petrify enemies with it. I used to think of this magic as being very gimmicky and I barely used it. Now though, I love it. Like with most things in this game, there's some risk-reward elements to using it. When you pull out the head, you are locked into place and cannot move until you put it away again. You have to be at a safe distance when using this because of it. You're essentially a sitting duck. This is especially the case when fighting a large group of enemies. However, you can petrify more than one enemy at a time if they are lined up. Once petrified, the enemies become way easier to kill. Shattering a petrified enemy will give you a crush kill, giving you 15 red orbs in addition to the ones you get from just killing the enemy. If a petrified enemy is dropped to the ground, you get a ruined kill, which gives you 30 orbs. You can rack up orbs really quickly with this thing. Upgrading it once grants you the Gorgon Flash, which speeds up the petrification but also uses magic faster. The third upgrade is Useless. It freezes everything around you but drains all of your magic. Not worth it at all, because you're not going to have time to kill everything that's around you anyways. It does make the gaze blue though, which I like. Next we have Zeus's Fury, the worst magic attack in the game. It's a ranged attack, it's kind of fast, but it takes a few seconds to get started. It uses the least amount of magic. It's mandatory here and very useful here, which are areas right after you get the magic. But there really is no reason to use it in combat over other magic attacks or just normal blade combat. It has a charge option after upgrading it and will also shoot faster, but again I never seem to use it because I really don't need to. Kinda sad that the magic given to us by the Father of Olympus is so underwhelming. I can't do it myself, but I have seen some people use this attack to extend their air combos, which is kinda cool. Maybe people would use this attack more if upon impact it shocked the enemies for a second, which could have been a good tool to stop the enemies from attacking for a short period without being overpowered, because it still would be low damage. And hey, maybe if they're in the air, they stay in the air for the time they're being shocked. You know, just a small idea on my part. Last and second best, or maybe even the best, Army of Hades, which summons these familiars for a short period. We get this pretty late into the game in comparison to other magic, but it still ends up being one of the best. It uses quite a bit of magic to cast, which is most likely for balancing reasons. These guys shred through enemies. Although I think Poseidon's Rage is still more useful in most situations, this attack is really good. However, sometimes the souls will pick enemies that aren't even on screen, which is kind of annoying, but I think I only ran into this problem literally once. You can't resummon the souls until they have all dissipated, which isn't a big problem until you get to the final section of the game, in which you're most likely going to want to take advantage of the Rage of the Gods giving you infinite magic while it's active if you fully upgrade your blades. But for some reason, the last souls sometimes will just kind of be chilling there, not attacking anybody, so you're just going to have to pick Poseidon's Rage instead. This is a really good magic attack. Don't let the high cost stop you from using this thing. It's really good. It's a shame we don't get to see it in any other game or anything really this similar to it. Since you have a limited amount of magic to work with, you're gonna have to make some tough decisions of what magic to use in what situation. You can hit everything with Poseidon's Rage, but perhaps you want to consider using Medusa's Gaze in some situations. You could use magic here, or you could try to save it for later, or you could find yourself wrongfully trying not to use magic when there's refill chests everywhere and you really should just let it rip. Speaking of which, after your first Blades of Chaos upgrade, you get the Rage of the Gods, a damage boost mode that you can activate once this bar is filled. The bar builds up by doing damage to enemies. It's important to note that even though you won't be staggered by enemy attacks while you're in this mode, you will still take damage from them. This is my favorite looking Rage mode in the whole series. The Lightning Spartan armor is a nice touch that I think most people may not have even noticed. Now that being said, it's also considered to be one of the worst in the series. Once activated, you can't turn it off, which really limits how you can use it. It also takes noticeably longer to fill up than future Rage modes. And as a consequence, many players hold off from using it until it's truly needed, and seem to often forget it's even an option. Your moveset is changed as well, and even though you do a decent amount of damage, the moves themselves just aren't as impactful as your normal ones, and they kinda look silly. Personally, I think the infinite magic option you can get really redeems this thing. Also, it didn't feel like it took that long to refill, but I do remember feeling that way when I first played the game. I guess I'll just have to compare these numbers when I play God of War 2 for the review, but I ended up activating the Rage of the Gods mode 11 times. That doesn't count the 9,000 times I used it in the last combat section, or any time I ended up using it but I needed to restart the section because I died or I hit reset. It honestly might not even be feasible to count how many times I'm going to use it in the second game, just because of how much easier it is to use in that game than in this one. I probably could have ended up using it more. I recorded these videos in 30-minute segments, and by the end I usually would have built up the meter again if I used it towards the beginning of the recording session. Again, that's not a foolproof way of testing how long it really takes to build this thing up, but that would be about 30 minutes of gameplay to refill this thing. 30 minutes for a total of 15 seconds? Yeah, besides taking forever to build up the meter, it also just doesn't last very long. 15 seconds of infinite magic isn't half bad considering that 3 out of 4 of the magic attacks are very, very useful. But if you want to properly take advantage of this mechanic for a majority of the game, you're gonna have to fast track upgrading your blades to the max level. I maxed them out after starting the challenge of Poseidon. I could have done so quicker, but I ended up upgrading some of my magic before that point. Talking about difficulty can be kind of tricky since it's a very subjective thing. There are things in the game that we can objectively point to gauge where things are at, but this truly depends on the player. Kind of. Maybe. Now, I know I said I played on very hard to prove a point about the game, that you can't just spam the attack button to get by, and that you have to properly utilize the tools that the game provides you with to succeed. I think I indeed proved this during my Let's Play, but I also learned that this game isn't very difficult. I know that might seem shocking to some of you if you've watched my Let's Play, since there were plenty of points towards the end of the game in which I struggled a great deal. Come on, dude. Yeah, inner Zesty activated. No, Zesty. Do I at least get a check? No! Do not kill the family! Damn, the family used to go to the gym though. They're like really weak. Come on, game. What was that? What was that? I am self-aware enough to recognize that those encounters could have been handled in a better way, especially if I wasn't recording and mainly focusing on what I was doing. Hell, I ended up playing the game again on very hard, and I did it an hour faster than I did the Let's Play. I'm not gonna start saying that the game is easy cruising until the end, though. I mean, it is. Well, I think. So back in 2015 when I played the game on normal, I remember struggling a lot at this point and at the second boss fight. Two areas I didn't struggle with at all during my hard mode playthrough last year, but then struggled a bit again during my Let's Play. I bring this up to say that, if you take your time to learn the game's systems and try to approach battles in a new way if you're having a difficult time with them, things shouldn't be too hard for you even on the hardest difficulty. If you simply try to spam Cyclone of Chaos and Plume of Prometheus every waking second, then you aren't going to have a good time. Likewise, if you just sit there and hold the block button most of the time, and only attack when you're absolutely safe to do so, you're still not going to have a good time. That being said, I think you'll get the most out of the game playing it on the hardest difficulty. Like I said, I don't think the game is that difficult. I was able to breeze through it last year on hard mode, and I ended up playing it again to help me write the script, again on hard mode, and it felt even easier. And then once again I played it on very hard, and that wasn't a breeze per se, but it wasn't as difficult as it was during the Let's Play. Now that could be because of my experience with the second game growing up, the tips and tricks I knew before going into it, and my Let's Play on very hard. Perhaps I'm just no longer in line with the average person's perspective when it comes to this game. Looking at the comments in King K's video, I found this gem and laughed, because I'm here to tell you the exact opposite. The game is at its best when it doesn't allow you to get complacent. It's at its best when it makes you work for the victory. It can get frustrating, but only if you don't try and adapt, like I kind of failed to do during the Let's Play. The game gives you all the tools you need, you just gotta learn how to use them. That all being said, unless you're playing on someone else's save file, the first time you play the game will have to be on hard mode at the most, since the game doesn't unlock very hard until you beat it once. So I mentioned my 2015 run earlier. That's a run that I never finished. The last time I played was in 2018 actually. It was on normal mode, and I decided to finish it just because, and I noticed that normal mode feels extremely easy. I know previously in the script I said that playing on easy or any of the lower difficulties was a legitimate way of playing the game, and I still kind of stand by that, but you shouldn't. Avoid normal mode. Hard mode is the bare minimum. It's not a thing about me looking down on players that have to play on normal mode. It's not as fun. Enemies just die way too quickly when you play on normal mode, so just don't do it. Play on hard. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't play on at least hard mode. And like I mentioned, very hard is where it's at, so yeah, don't play on normal mode. It possibly might have seemed like I contradicted myself there. I do think there is a difference between something that is generally easy and something that is brain dead, because you still have to think about it. Again, look at my Let's Play and you can see me not thinking about it a few times and I die very often. It wasn't until part 7 that I was able to not die during a recording session. Now again, I'm not very good at this game, I know, but it just kind of goes to show that you gotta pay attention. But this is why I find it so frustrating to see people complaining about the simplicity while playing on either easy or normal. I think it's about time we get into the enemies. First we have the Undead Legionnaire, the most basic of enemies. The Goomba the most basic of enemies. Every enemy type has different variations. These start off with nothing but a sword and a helm. Their attacks come in pretty slowly, giving you the chance to either block or roll out of the way. You can grab these enemies whenever you want to, but more difficult variants require weakening beforehand, showing a circle prompt once you reach the damage threshold needed. It seems like they grab opportunities on a timer though, so if you want to take advantage of it, do so quickly. When you grab them, you have 3 options. Beat them with circle, throw them with square, or rip them in half with triangle. Triangle being the quickest way to get rid of them without granting any orbs. Unless it does. The throw being the best if you want to damage other enemies, and the beatdown being for when you want to keep the hit counter up or if there's only one enemy left. It's important to note that even the weakest variant has this get up attack that they'll do after being knocked down. If you just keep attacking a downed enemy, you're gonna get clapped. You will soon find yourself fighting a slightly stronger version of this enemy, which has more armor and is packing a bigger sword. They also have this jump slash they can do. It has this blue highlight so the player can easily tell when they're about to get hit, and when they should probably start blocking. It's not too uncommon for these guys to do this attack one after another, so you're gonna get comboed if you're not careful. The strongest variant has this cool spiked armor and a sword. There is a variant that has a shield, which you need to hit with a plume in order to break. This enemy type appears so infrequently that you might even forget they exist. Once you break their shield, they just become the normal version, but a little better because you can grab them right away. You can even grab them if they still have their shield if they got knocked back by a thrown enemy. Finally, we have the archer variation. Oh boy, my least favorite enemy. There are 3 different flavors: normal, exploding arrows, and Hades exploding arrows. They all suck, but the ones you're going to be encountering the most is the exploding arrows. They don't do that much damage, they're just very annoying. If they are perched on a platform and you get too close, they'll often do this hit quick shot combo on you. This part is hell. This part is hell. This part is Hades, but you get the idea. I guess I could use Zeus's Fury to take these guys out faster, but they are rarely that far away to justify me using it and not just roll towards them. I hate these the most. There really isn't anything I would change about them since I just kind of find them annoying and not poorly designed. Maybe I would change arrows making you 1,000 times heavier when you're shot mid-air.
Someone clip that.
Next we have what the British call a Minotaur, but what we are going to call a Minotaur. These guys are a step up from the last, and can very easily two-shot you early on. This is because you'll most likely run to these guys in pairs. They start off using axes, but will quickly transition into using hammers that can do this shockwave attack that has a goofy-ass hitbox. They don't start off with too much health, but they seem to have a ton later on. This guy takes multiple Poseidon's Rages to the face and is still kicking, for example. Once they start blocking your attack, they'll most likely do a counterattack that will stun you, and then follow it up with a hard-hitting slam. I'm pretty sure you have to roll out of the way to avoid this attack. Later on they get this charging attack as well that seems pretty inconsequential, and I don't like how long it takes for them to start up. Once weakened, you can perform a QTE kill on them by mashing the circle, which will grant you green orbs like I mentioned earlier. Decent enemy, not too hard, but will definitely punish you if they catch you slipping. Next we have the Mighty Cyclops. These enemies don't appear too often. When they do, you might want to keep your distance and play it safe, unless you want half of your health disappearing, or 1/8 of it. The damage they do matches their gargantuan size unless you're playing on normal. You might feel inclined to save your Rage of the Gods for encounters like these, but honestly I don't think it's really necessary. They ultimately don't have as much health as you might think, and Rage of the Gods is better used against groups of enemies in my view. Though if you just want to get a move on, then that is a good option. The first Cyclops we run across is actually equipped with a mechanical extending ball and chain. They also have this dive attack that might catch you off guard, and other general smashing attacks. These guys also have a QTE kill, which might be my favorite in the game. The movement is very fluid, and the last stab really has some impact to it. It's funny to think that we never take out its eye, which would be a pretty obvious thing to do. Next we have this unarmored version that's rocking what looks like a piece of jaw as its weapon. These guys will run at you surprisingly fast and for a surprisingly long time. They also have this sweeping attack that they can do that lasts pretty long. They don't actually have a QTE kill option, but instead this chain yank you can do a few times before killing them. It is a good idea to go after them for the extra orbs though. This is the part where I mentioned they originally gave this bro an 18-inch cock, but I won't. Finally, we have these sand versions, I guess. I don't really know what's going on with the horns on their backs, but I like it. They very strangely have this dash attack. Yeah, I don't know why. These do have a QT option, but it is a little bit different than the first one. They also have this multi-hit slash smash thing going on, which you don't want to get caught in. Also, these guys ringed me out during the Let's Play, which is kind of funny. Alright, there we go. I like how he turned around for the camera. I pressed the wrong button. Don't kill me. Oh, no. No, 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 no. I think visually, these might be my favorite. The Cyclops appears in a sufficient amount of times. Increase the number and I think players will get annoyed how much fighting them slows the pace of the game down. Next we have the Gorgons, which I called the Medusas earlier because the game calls them that. But they also correctly call them Gorgons in the manual, so I'm just gonna call them Gorgons from now on. Though in my and the game's defense, the first one we fight is actually Medusa herself. She seems to have a little more health than the normal Gorgons do. She also has this unique design, which I appreciate. Gorgons have pretty fast strikes, which is very snake-like. They also have this slower wind-up attack that might throw you off, which is also kind of snake-like. Sneaky bastards. They seem to do a quick attack after getting knocked down, similar to the undead enemies, so keep that in mind. It might seem like their attacks come out of nowhere, but with enough experience it's pretty easy to gauge when it's coming. Gorgons can obviously petrify the player, and
So many of these little frustrations. If you get stoned by a Gorgon while in the air, you'll drop like a rock and break instantly as you hit the ground. Getting destroyed while you're stoned results in an instant kill, a nuisance in and of itself, but when you're just jumping around trying to avoid the big stoner beam, it feels like a huge slap in the face that you die instantly with zero recourse.
okay, here's a pro tip. Don't jump while fighting a Gorgon. At the very least, don't do so when it's casting its gaze at you. Also, if you really don't want to get petrified, maybe try, I don't know. It's not that hard to avoid getting petrified. I would understand his complaint if there was an enemy in the game that forcibly launched you into the air that got paired with the Gorgons often, but that's not the case. The gaze petrifies you over time. It isn't instant. So it's not like if it starts his gaze while you're already in the air, you're just dead instantly. This is an enemy type that forces you to pay attention. You can't just brute force your way through it with parries. You have to approach it in a different way. You know, kind of like what you said about Metal Gear Rising.
You're required to pay attention in Metal Gear Rising. There's so many different enemies that approach you in different ways, and you can't always brute parry your way through it all.
The thing is, you could have still criticized the game for being pretty simple. Like I demonstrated before, all it takes is a roll to avoid petrification. You can also interrupt their gaze with a plume fairly easily. You could have spun that as an overly simplistic way of avoiding its attacks, because again, it's really just a stick tilt. Instead, you've shown that you don't understand the game. The game gave you exactly what you were asking for, perhaps even a watered down version of what you had in mind, and it still managed to trump you. Now, everybody has their blind spots. I'm sure I have said or will someday say some goofy ass shit about a game that other people look at and go, what is this man on about? But damn did he get this one wrong. I've been playing God of War, the series, not the first game, for a very long time. Knowing to roll out of a Gorgon's gaze is essentially second nature to me. I don't clearly remember when or how I learned that was a thing. Maybe he just didn't know about it? That being said, he is doing a retrospective on the game, so I think it's reasonable to expect him to have, at the very least, the most basic of knowledge about the game. And if someone tries to argue that it's still bad design because you can get one-shotted afterwards, even after getting petrified, you still have some time to wiggle yourself free. In summary, don't jump while fighting a Gorgon, roll. It's not that hard. Anyways, you can stop the Gorgon's gaze with the plume, but this gets harder once you have two gazes hitting you at the same time, since you won't be able to get the full attack out before getting petrified. The QT involves rotating the sticks in a certain direction to pull off the Gorgon's head and get some magic back. QTs that involve stick rotations can be finicky at times, and I'm not exactly sure why. I found that most of the time it works fine, but every so often it would mess up even though I definitely did it right. And then there was that one time where I completely messed up and the game still gave it to me. I completely did it wrong and the game still gave it to me, but okay. It made up for all the times I did it right and it didn't give it to me. We also have this blue variation of the Gorgons, which can petrify you faster, and the QT kill requires one extra spin. They also look pretty cool. Next we have the Wraiths. During my Let's Play I said that these enemies weren't very fun to fight, but honestly I was thinking more of the second game. Here they aren't too hard. Their most notable feature is their ability to go beneath the earth to avoid damage and to attack you. These assholes will stay under there and chase you until they come in contact with you, by the way, so you can't outrun them. Getting hit by this attack sucks, because it leaves you wide open for others to come in and do the same thing, which can easily lead to your death. The trade-off here is that the wraiths don't need to be weakened to be grabbed. You can just do it. The grab launches them into the air, and a grab in the air has you dropping them back to the ground. After a grab though, they will always burrow underground, so watch out. If they are weak enough when you grab them, Kratos will perform this decapitation kill, which I kinda like. This enemy can be annoying, but not nearly as much as they will later be. They also don't show up 99% of the time you're in the temple, and I don't recall them showing up afterwards either. By the way, these guys are guys and not women. I could understand why some people would assume that they are women based on their movements and their skirts, but yeah, they're dudes. Harpies are annoying bat enemies that don't give off red orbs if you grab them. They have low health, can swoop down to hit you. Later on they get this dive bomb attack. Some people like this version of the attack more than how it works in future games. Here, once you're under the reticle, the attack goes off. In future games, it's timed, so you can be under it a bit before it goes off. There really is no point trying to avoid this attack until you're under the reticle. I've heard people say they like it much better because they know exactly when it's going to go off, but it's not like it's hard to tell when it's going to happen in the later games. I think it's just irritating here. Getting comboed by enemies because of this attack going off so quickly isn't fun. That's really the only change I would make to them though, because again, not bad design, just annoying to me. They're really great for farming red orbs with Medusa's gaze since they're already in the air, and again, petrified enemies that fall to the ground give you 30 red orbs. Sirens are nowhere near a sea and appear in the exact opposite of one, a desert. They like to move out of the way of your attacks a lot and then hit you with a small shock attack. They also have this suck move that can bring you in closer, which is more annoying than anything else really. Halfway through their health you can grab them to smack their faces a bit, and then grab them again to finish them off. Except when you first encounter them. There you get a different animation because they are used as a key to move forward. I really don't like this enemy. I can't really tell if I'm damaging them or if they're just skillfully dodging my attacks with moves like these. There really isn't much more to say about them, they just kind of exist. I enjoy them more in the second game. The Cerberus is a hellspawn that can summon smaller versions of itself, which if you don't kill fast enough will transform into the big version. These guys can shoot fire and can pounce at you. You can surprisingly get these guys into the air and combo them. Yeah, I don't know how many people even know about that. I sure as hell didn't until last year. I've seen a lot of people struggle with this encounter a decent amount. As long as you take out the small ones and don't let them grow up, you should be fine. If you get 2, 3, or even 4 of these guys on screen, do yourself a favor and just reset. Being able to juggle them in the air is a pretty useful thing, so keep that in mind. You strangely don't decapitate any of the heads in this game. You just kind of slash at them and then stab the middle one. Next we have... well, these guys don't have a name yet, technically. They are the only enemy other than the Cyclops to not get an intro cutscene, and they don't have an entry in the manual either. I'm guessing the game is lumping them in with the Undead Legionnaires, but these guys are different enough to be considered a separate enemy and not just a variant. The second game refers to them as the Legionnaire Captain, so I'm going to be calling them that here. They have a lengthy attack string that can catch you off guard if you unblock too early. This swipe has some good range to it too. Oh, and they can grab you. Not like the Legionnaires can do where you can shake them off. No, these guys ain't messing around, they just straight up headbutt you. The first circle prompt will let you throw them like this, and the kill option is very satisfying. These enemies are pretty tough, they block a lot of your attacks and do a decent amount of damage over time. I really like their stance, it really conveys that they are an upgrade from most enemies. It's a shame they aren't utilized more. Next we have the Centaurs. I always forget about this enemy for some reason. They have this bow that can hit you multiple times, and this unblockable multi-hit shockwave attack, which absolutely sucks and can get you hit by multiple enemies. Not only do they have terrible attacks, but they also have a strange first encounter. You have to kill them in these circles to progress to the next room. The circles aren't very big, and they like to move around a lot, so keeping them in there isn't very easy. First circle prompt will make you throw them, which can suck because you can end up throwing them out of the circle. The second grab has you slicing them up. I really don't care for this enemy. They will not be missed in the second game. Last we have the Satyrs, probably the most difficult enemy in the game. They are very nimble, they have long hit strings. They can enter this stance where if you hit them, they will counterattack. They can grab you with their pole, stop players' attacks, and they move around a lot. Grabbing them enters you into the struggle where you have to mash circle. You are still vulnerable to other enemies' attacks though, so maybe don't do this. I believe grabbing them midair actually does no damage at all, so don't bother. Although it can be annoying to fight them, I do appreciate the increase in difficulty. They also look very Egyptian, which kind of makes me sad we never got a game in Egypt. Now, I've left something out of all this talk about the enemies, and if you're more familiar with the game than the average person, you've probably noticed. Here's the thing. I've said that this game isn't that difficult, but you can find plenty of examples of people online struggling against some of these enemies, especially the last few we covered. I mean, hell, I'm one of those people. So why is it that I still stand by this statement? Enemies are difficult until they're not. You can have a hell of a time with them until you figure out how to beat them. On paper, that sounds fine, and is probably fitting for pretty much any game. The issue here is that the solutions are often very, very simple. Minotaurs? Just get them in the air and grab them. They will bounce right back up into you and you could grab them again, dying in only 3 grabs. Gorgons? The same thing. Captains? Not exactly the same, but very similar. Centaurs? Yep. The Cerberus isn't the same, but again, having them in the air is probably your best option. You can't do this with the Satyr, but I did find this loop you can do, which probably isn't the most optimal option, but it's still kind of funny. The question is this a bad thing? Well, on the one hand, this isn't immediately obvious to the player. The captain requires you to buffer your heavy attack to pull it off. You are de-incentivized from air combat against Gorgons for obvious reasons. Some of these you probably didn't even know could be brought into the air, and others are not worth killing this way all the time, so you can collect their QTE rewards. You could argue that the game rewards the player for fully understanding the combat mechanics. You could say that these things are mostly necessary for a playthrough on very hard in an optimal way. I think there is some truth to that. But on the other hand, it's also not very hard to do. I like the Legionnaire captains for how much different they are from the normal Legionnaires. When I see them, I think, okay, I have to step it up a bit. Well, I did. Now I see them and think, well, I get to do this satisfying move at the very least. I think another point against this is that the second game removed all of these options, because Santa Monica probably didn't want players to be able to beat them with such ease. And although it is kind of disappointing not being able to style on these fools in the second game like we can do here, it's probably for the best that we can't, from a design perspective at least. But then I see comments like these and other players are struggling a lot, and I think those quick methods of taking out enemies aren't such a bad thing. Maybe it doesn't matter that those methods exist because they're too busy square triangling everything to notice all the other possible options that the game has. It's also not like once I learned about these methods, it's the only thing I ever do. I still take on the Minotaurs the normal way for the most part. So I don't think this is truly a bad thing, but it definitely could have been if a few different decisions were made along the way. I pretty much said this already, but I consider playing the game on very hard really the only way to play at this point. Hard is too easy. It only starts to get difficult right before Pandora's box, and that's mostly because this encounter is designed poorly. Again, difficulty is very subjective, so your mileage may vary. I struggled 1,000 times more playing the second game on very hard. Like, it's not even funny how much harder that game is to this one. But we'll just have to wait and see. Maybe by the time I actually cover the game, I'll be a lot better at it, and I'll be saying the same thing as I'm saying here. I'm only going to be talking about 2 of the 3 bosses in this section. We'll get to Ares when I cover the story. First we have the Hydra. It's hard to say where the boss truly begins. Do these not count towards the boss fight? Is it only this part? Are these phases to the fight? I am going to be counting them, although I think somebody could argue that they're simply warm-ups to the actual fight. First part consists of a single head. All its attacks are blockable and the encounter ends with a QTE section. I've brought up QTEs a lot during this video, but I haven't really explained how I feel about them. QTEs have become a controversial subject matter in gaming. In principle, most people will say it makes a game worse for basically tricking the player into thinking they are achieving more than they actually are. and that it is used as a substitute for real gameplay. God of War is different though, it does QTEs in a good way. For one, they are not mandatory unless you're fighting a boss. The player chooses whether or not to initiate them. You already achieved the real part of the battle, and now it's time to finish it off in a flashy way or in a way that gets you extra rewards. For the most part, the actions correspond with the button presses we end up doing. Mashing for struggles, stick rotations for head twists. The only time where there are just button presses is during boss fights. And in that case, what you're getting out of the game is spectacle. I think the spectacular elements of the original God of War are overstated. If you're honestly playing the game mostly for the visuals to wow you, then just play 3. There really isn't too much of that here. And most importantly, well, the fact that I spent all this time without even mentioning it shows that there is way more to the game than just, wow, look at this cool stuff, bro. I would be lying if I said that wasn't part of the reason I fell in love with the series in the first place, but that was when I was like 10. I think it's pretty obvious I appreciate this game for so much more than just that. Anyways, back to the Hydra. The first QT is a pretty good introduction into the mechanic, because it teaches the player about them in a very easy way to understand. It's also really hard to mess up since it will always be the triangle button. This section also teaches you the importance of blocking, and that you can't just mash the buttons. The second Hydra head introduces the player to the importance of positioning, rolling when blocking isn't an option, and shows you that there's different types of QTEs. After a while you get to the main head and 2 lesser ones. You have to beat these before facing the main one, and they are pretty much identical from the last one we fought. Only difference being is that they can suck Kratos towards them and away from the other one. They will be healed if you leave them alone long enough, so after knocking them out you need to nail them to the deck. Once that is done, you can safely face the main head. Hitting the head at the right time and in the right way is key here. Best time to do so is after it bites down at you. You can avoid damage with a magic attack and follow it up with a string that will keep the Hydra head stun-locked until it's concluded. Doing so can grant you a large sum of orbs. This is actually something that can happen during every boss fight in this game. It is simply a way to make the player go after those longer attack strings. Do enough damage and you'll be able to enter a QTE that has you smacking the head against the post, which will eventually break it. The Hydra head can roar at you, which can knock you off the platform. It can also bite the sides of the platforms and not just the middle, which will force you to learn how to use the roll mechanic. After knocking it out for the last time, you trigger a QTE that has you impaling the Hydra on the mast. After knocking it out for the last time, you trigger another QTE that has you impaling the head in the mast. I think it's a fine boss. I don't seem to like it as much as other people do. Perhaps that's because my first intro boss was the Colossus of Rhodes in the next game, so my standards are just higher. It does its job well though, being an exciting intro to the game while also teaching the player about the game's fundamental mechanics. Nothing really wrong with it either, so I can't complain. Next, however, is one of my favorite bosses in the whole series. This is actually a recent discovery of mine. Why is this my favorite boss? Well, it truly tests the player. If you haven't figured out the combat mechanics at this point, you aren't gonna have an easy time here. It's firm but fair difficulty. You can parry most of its attacks, and it feels really satisfying to do so. You can go from having him on the ropes to making a mistake and dying fairly quickly. I don't mind it at all here, since like the other bosses, you get magic and health back pretty easily if you're doing well. And if you know what you're doing, you can really stop him from doing almost anything. Bro, that could have been a bullying boss video that people like to upload. It's an idea that stems from the last boss, but gets brought to the next level here. Instead of just stunning him as long as the combo is going, you can totally make him your bitch. It's not perfect though. You have to deal with these inconsistent stick rotations. Not that big of a deal since failing them doesn't mean instant death, but it does get annoying. You'll have an easier time if you don't let go of the stick between rotations, which seems backwards. There's also these attacks that I'm not sure how you're supposed to avoid, like this one. I also don't really care for this attack either, since if it catches you, you're really just gonna get juggled for a bit. But oh man, you see this? This is my domain. And while I am here, this guy has to play by my rules. Most of the fight is actually us just getting rid of his armor to reveal his fleshy body and his health bar. Once we get him down to nothing, we use this stake launcher to finish the job. I love this boss. If you know what you're doing, you can breeze through it. Yet, it is still a challenge, since it can realistically kill you if you get too relaxed. It demands the player engages with the system the game has, and doing so makes the experience an absolute joy to play and to watch. Some could argue this boss is too easy, which I think might be a fair thing to say, but I still believe there is enough challenge here. Also, we have this funny glitch. What the fuck's going on? Oh no, this is the God of War 4 glitch. What? No. I thought that was like a mod Zesty and other people use. I know it was a glitch. That's funny. How does that happen though? Before moving on to bigger topics, I wanted to cover some miscellaneous things, which are mostly complaints. Auto-lock. The game will help the player connect their attacks by locking onto the nearest object or enemy when attacking. For the most part, this isn't much of a problem, to the point where I wasn't even sure if the PS2 version even had this. But it is noticeable when in a large group of enemies. My plumes here are getting redirected to the civilians, which is annoying. You can see it here too in the Minotaur fight. They keep going right even though I'm not aiming there. And here I end up tracking the enemy way too hardly and I end up spinning around. There's no way to turn this off, unfortunately. Inconsistent R2 indicators. Sometimes we'll get a little R2 button in the corner when we need to use it, but often we don't. Making it kinda hard to tell when you're supposed to use it. Like on this wall. It doesn't really look grabbable, but you can grab it. We also don't get the little sparkle that is supposed to indicate the ability to interact with the object. The upgrading process just takes way too long. It's completely unnecessary. Yeah. The checkpoints. Oh god, the checkpoints. There are some in here that really suck. Really the only thing you would need to do to fix this is just to add more or change their location. Like why is the checkpoint all the way up here instead of right outside the cave? This is no point of it being over there, not here. I've noticed the game likes to buffer my inputs a lot of the time, which can lead to me doing stuff that I really don't want to do. There are times that there will be 2 chests so you can refill your health and magic. Sometimes you'll have one of each. Sometimes you'll have chests that are switching, but other times you'll have one that is switching and one that is fixed, leading me to have to reset from the last checkpoint a couple times because I didn't notice that one was switching and the other one wasn't. What? Why? Just have them both be switching or set. Why is that's dumb? Clearly, the intern just accidentally put the wrong chest there in the editor. So people bring up the fact that mashing R2 in the PS3 version is made worse because of the springy nature of the button. The thing is though, it isn't good here either. It feels really unwieldy. Not as bad, but still pretty bad. My middle or index finger aren't really meant for mashing. You know, that's what the thumb is for. Enemies will spawn in way slower than they need to sometimes. These archers replacements just take way too long to pop up. Makes you think that you've beaten all the enemies in an area when you haven't. Just kind of distracting, honestly. So I was originally going to put this in the story section, but I felt like it distracted too much from the overall point I was making in that section, so it's here. The worst combat encounter in the game is often stated to be what the fans have dubbed the Clone War. But no. It's not. This abomination of an encounter is. So we got some really basic enemies here. Not too bad, I guess. Except they are 2 of the most annoying enemies in the game. We have moving floors and these cylinders on the sides that will cause you damage. Not only that, but we also have to deal with these lovely things to the sides. Stand on these platforms too long and you are instantly killed by a little poof of fire. How long is too long? Well, if you go to grab an enemy and are interrupted, you won't have enough time to re-grab the enemy and throw him. It's the perfect storm of annoyance. The moving floor makes it harder than normal to approach the enemies, which we're gonna have to do if we want to deal with the archers, unless you want to pull out Zeus's Fury for that one. Combine that with the Harpy's awesome dive bomb and swoop attacks that can seemingly come out of nowhere, and combine that with the possibility of dying instantly, we have this chaotic mess. Yeah, did I mention you can instantly die here by a little poof of fire, just a little foof? Yet why? Why isn't it just normal damage? This encounter is made hard mostly from inconvenience created by the environment rather than the enemy design. So after writing this segment, I played the game again on very hard, and here I ended up using level 3 Army of Hades, and that made the encounter pretty easy. Now the only problem with that is that there's no magic refill before this section, anywhere near before this section, so that's not always going to be an option. Yeah, I guess just don't use magic once you get to like this part of the game, up until you get to Pandora's box. Now that all being said, luckily for us, this is really easy encounter to skip because the trigger is weird. So yeah, you can just skip this whole encounter. I would advise against doing that on your very first playthrough though. Many people have stated their issues with the camera. To be honest, it doesn't bother me that much. There are a few moments where the game totally shits the bed, but for the most part I think it works fine. I don't think being able to move the camera manually would significantly improve the gaming experience here, so I'm fine with it. Also, I started playing Devil May Cry 1 after I wrote the script, and yeah, I don't get how people can compare that game's camera to this one's, because that one's real bad. God of War is not nowhere near as bad as Devil May Cry 1's. Alright, let's talk about some positive things now. I love how Kratos looks in this game. He is slim and toned in a way that we never get to see again, really. The wraps around his arms and legs, the tattoo and skirt matching just really well. While the gold accents kind of match the wraps themselves. His face, he just looks like he's been through a lot. His battle ready pose is really good too. It really indicates aggression and preparedness for said aggression. It all plays really well together. Great design. I do like the concept art for the blue version, but the models that we see in game just don't look as good as the final version we ended up getting, so I'm glad they went with that instead of the blue one. Hey, did you know that Medusa's head is dripping blood? That's a cool detail. Also, the gaze is 2 separate cones. Yeah, they're a bit off-centered, but you're never going to notice that unless you're this close. Also, look at this. Kratos is actually moving his legs while he rotates. He's not just this. It's such a minor thing, but it really shows they cared. I didn't really mention this while talking about QTs, but they feel really good to perform. They have a lot of punch to them. Very cathartic. They would be even more cathartic if your grab couldn't miss at times, but it can and it sucks. Not even just QT grabs, just in general, your grab can miss when it really shouldn't. Where's auto lock here? Where'd that go? Can we bring that back, please? I really like the blades physically changing with each upgrade. The last one has the fire become this bright red instead of the normal orange, and it really stands out. I like it. You can even see it in some of the cutscenes, which is nice. In other cutscenes, the blades look totally different, and it makes no sense. But for the most part, they get it right, and they kind of like predict what upgrade you would have for that part of the game, which is nice. All the magic and the Blade of Artemis also change with each upgrade, which is nice. The environments in God of War are varied and fleshed out pretty well. There isn't an area in the game that feels unfinished to me. Athens is where I think the game shines the most. We arrive at a city already under attack. We go from an area that has already seen combat prior to our arrival, in which things have died down quite a bit, to areas that are currently under attack, albeit with minor forces, not really major targets. Areas that weren't given enough attention to even have any soldiers in them. Civilians are currently running from invading forces. To right in the middle of the worst of it. fire everywhere, soldiers falling in combat, infrastructure in ruins. Ares even walks by us at one point, to then again be outside of the main conflict looking at it from afar. We pass over the invasion and it passes over us. Then at the end we return to this area which was pretty untouched before but is now completely decimated. The temple itself is also great. Having multiple sections that are semi-themed is a great way of changing the visuals without them just changing them for no reason. I also really like that Hades is made out of flesh and bone. They could have easily gone with the fire and brimstone motif, but I'm really glad they didn't. Although I would say this is the weakest area in the game because it really is just platforms over a large void. I will say I do like the constant falling of people in the background. You can hear them yelling. That's a nice touch too. I'll get into this more during the story segment, but God of War really likes to loop back on itself. And in gameplay that translates to looping back to previously explored areas, usually allowing you to take another path to move forward. I think Hades might be the only area in the whole game where that's just not the case, unless we want to count us exiting Hades, then that's like one of the biggest loops in the game, but that doesn't really count. The music is what I would call good. It's not great, but it's really good. There's just something about this soundtrack that doesn't feel as impactful as other ones, especially compared to the next game's soundtrack. Don't get me wrong, there are great tracks in this game, like The Vengeful Spartan. Ares' battle. The Minotaur theme. Zeus' Wrath Divine, which is the theme that plays during the Clone War. But then there's themes like Sirens Before Kronos. Wraiths in the Temple. And the Challenge of Atlas. These tracks aren't bad by any means, but there's just something about them that just doesn't really do much for me. And it's not the fact that they're more subdued tracks either. Not everything needs to be epic for me to enjoy it, really. I can enjoy an environmental track here and there, especially if it fits the setting as well as this one would. This one's really good. I wish this was in the game. Environmental tracks can be just as emotive, if not even more so. I'm just not sure exactly what about the soundtrack doesn't exactly click with me as the second one does. Again, not bad work though. T.C. Carson plays Kratos here, and I believe this is his best performance as the character. Whereas in future games, he ends up mostly playing the brutal side of the character. Here he's a lot more balanced. Here he can be calm.
The Oracle spoke of Pandora's box. Can it be real?
Angry.
Foul beast! I will send you back to the depths of Hades!
Scared.
No, I can't!
Or absolutely distraught.
Oh, not again.
It's a good voice for the character. It's not anything out of this world, but it absolutely fits the setting. The other roles aren't bad either, but they aren't nearly as fleshed out. The voices of the gods are good enough, Zeus being the most interesting outside of Athena, but that's only because he's basically playing two different characters, technically. Athena speaks in this cold, matter-of-fact way, which makes sense since the relationship dynamic is between master and servant essentially, or god and mortal. There's a clear hierarchy here, and Kratos knows his place. Ares is fine. He does sound very malevolent during one of the last cutscenes in the game. I think the only voice that really doesn't fit is the voice of the body burner, since he just kind of sounds like a normal person and not a half-dead creature.
May the gods grant you strength to conquer the perils that lay before you. Good luck, Spartan.
Oh, I also don't understand why they used a different voice line here, since the first take was so much better. Secrets in God of War consists of chests that are hidden away, containing either red orbs, gorgon eyes, or phoenix feathers. Collecting 6 will extend either your health or magic meter.
I just can't say it ever felt like I had to put much effort forth to fully upgrade my health and mana, whereas it can be an ordeal in most Zelda titles, or hell, even Darksiders. That's partly because God of War is designed so that there are more than 16 of these pieces of heart. This is yet another way in which it just sort of lets you through with little effort. If you aren't good enough to spot every single crack in the wall or every single obscured hidden room, that's fine because there's more than enough to go around.
Oh, this guy's not done. Okay. Zelda is a non-linear game in which you can return to previous areas pretty much whenever you want to. You missed a gold Skulltula? Just go back and get it. You don't have the right tool to get a certain thing right now? Come back later once you do. There are only a few times in God of War where you can go back to a previously explored area. But didn't you just say it likes to loop back on itself? Yes, but there are hard limits to that. If you don't grab these chests at the beginning of the game, once you open this door, there's no way of returning to do so. That's why the game gives you more than what you would need. It gives the player some breathing room so they don't have to worry about exploring every single corner in the game to get their meters maxed out. There's still a benefit to doing it as early as possible. Once you collected all the Gorgon eyes, the remaining chests that would have them turn into red orbs chests. And not just normal red orbs chests either, they have a surplus of red orbs. Want to have an easier time maxing out your gear? Go out and find all the collectibles as early as possible. Not only that, but you can't even max out your meters by just collecting the phoenix feathers and gorgon eyes. In the temple, there are 4 hidden muse keys, only 2 being required to unlock the room that grants you the last bit of meter extension. They are pretty easy to miss, so despite the game giving you a surplus of items for your upgrades, you can still end up finishing the game not maxed out. If the game only had the required amount of gorgon eyes and phoenix feathers, I got a feeling that a lot of people would complain about that because of the linear design of the game. Yeah, don't make it like Zelda. That's dumb. I'm gonna add puzzles and platform into one section because the puzzles here aren't the strongest. It's really basic stuff. Turn this thing, shoot the wall, pull this lever, push the block before you die, turn this, shoot the door. This is probably the most memorable one right here. It's fine. There is a delicate balance when it comes to implementing puzzles into action games. Too hard, the player gets stuck and complains. Too easy, the player gets bored and complains. Really, they exist to slow down the tempo of what's happening without making you watch a cutscene. Some people seem to think that action games need to have puzzles that relate to combat, and if they don't, then there's no point of having them. I think this is dumb. Not everything needs to rely on combat. Expand your horizons and realize that games don't have to be only one thing. Not only that, but the puzzles are really short. It's not that big of a deal that there's not combat involved in these things in your combat action game. Also, the combat puzzles that we end up getting aren't great. First, we have the infamous push block puzzle. Yeah, I'm not even sure if this qualifies, honestly. Push the block to the end to get to the archers. Don't let the archers break the box. It's not a bad idea, but it's pretty strange that it's at the beginning, because we really don't see anything like this throughout the rest of the game. Intros usually should be used to introduce the players to the general mechanics of a game. It does that well for combat, but here it just feels like a misstep and kind of random. I guess you could say that this is introducing the player to the fact that there are puzzles in the game, but that's kind of a stretch. Also, this isn't a great puzzle, it's just kind of annoying. I feel like speeding up the time it takes for Kratos to kick the thing would help here. You can trick the archers into shooting way off target here, but I just really don't feel any kind of satisfaction once I get the box to the end. It's more like, hurry up and get up there before the archers manage to break the thing. We also have this section that I absolutely hate, but I also kind of like. Look, either you do this thing in 2 attempts, or you spend about an hour here trying to push this guy up this dumb ramp. You gotta act fast. Medusa's gaze is good for that here. The spawns seem to be timed here, so killing one won't immediately spawn the other. There is a degree of strategy to this, but there's also a degree of luck involved. Success is heavily dependent on how fast they end up attacking you. If you have a bad start, save yourself the trouble and reset. Confession time. I ended up recording this part twice for the Let's Play. The first time I ended up taking about an hour and just got nowhere. Also, it's really sad to see that Kratos is a misandrist. I'm guessing that's why Santa Monica haven't ported the game to the PS5, because they're more socially conscious now. Did you pause the video while you looked up what misandrist meant, or are you doing so while we're still playing here? Platforming is probably the worst aspect of the game. Most people's complaints about this game usually stems from this. The beam balancing isn't really hard, it's kind of annoying at the most. Well, for some people it's hard. It's really quite simple actually. I think most of the animosity comes from this section in the challenge of Hades. But even then, all you have to do to avoid damage is jump. Yeah, I don't get it. Getting hit is pretty much instant death here. Not always though. If you fall at the wrong time, you won't be able to get back up before the blades hit you. Again though, I don't think falling here is that easy, because falling in general isn't that easy. Pay attention to Kratos' feet while doing this. It might give you an easier time with it. Like, I only fell from just walking off at the beginning and at the end because I looked away from the screen. I think my controller has some like drift issues. But that's it. Seems like Santa Monica knew that the players hated this, because in the next game, the beams were made a lot wider, and they almost took out platforming entirely. Sections where you have to perform a double jump are annoying to me. This is because you have to space out your jumps. If you simply double jump right away, you will often not be able to reach the place you're trying to get to. Jumping shouldn't be a hard thing to do. And I mean, it's not. But I shouldn't be wondering why I can't make this very simple jump. So in one of the videos we get after beating the game, we're shown one of the levels that didn't end up in the game, and whoever was playing had the same issue and had to no clip to keep going through. So I feel vindicated. Not even the developers knew how to jump in this game. Hades is a part of the game that seemingly most people dislike, and that's because it's mostly platforming. These are a bit harder, and it can get annoying having to redo sections after dying just to get the chests again, but Hades overall is a pretty short section, so it's not that big of a deal. But the most hated platforming section in the entire game is probably the Pillar of Death, a rotating, spike-ridden pillar that you need to climb to get out of Hades. Why is this part so hated? Well, getting hit means you get knocked down all the way to the bottom. The blade's hitboxes are much bigger than you might think. And there are actually 2 pillars, the second one being much taller. I did this in my first attempt. Most people end up dying because of all the times they end up falling, so even though I did end up getting hit, I'm counting this as a first attempt. The trick here is knowing when and when not to jump. I've seen a lot of people just spam that jump button on this section. Patience is key here. There's no point in making a hard section even harder by rushing things. I wouldn't say I like this section, but I do like the fact that it exists. It makes sense that the climb out of Hades would be hard. Nice integration of gameplay and story. Speaking of which, I'm going to be presenting the story the same way it's presented to us, in non-linear fashion. I'll get into why later, but I'm also going to be analyzing the story in the original context in which it was released, which is to say, in 2005. Meaning that games that take place chronologically before this one will not be taken into consideration because they quite literally have not happened yet. I'll be talking how those games changed this one's context once I cover those games. For the time being, we're sticking to the OG. The reason why I'm doing this, and the reason why I think other people should do this with all kind of media analysis, is because we can truly understand the writer's intentions when they're writing this piece of work. Things change over time in this franchise, and too often people just accept the new changes as always being there, and they never really stop to think how those changes retroactively make things in the previous games not make as much sense or conflict with the original intention of those games. A perfect example is the Metal Gear series. Metal Gear's ongoing conflict wasn't centered around Big Boss and his actions until it was, and then made to be that way retroactively. These were not reveals that things were always this way, we just didn't know about it. Things were made to be one way, and then they changed it. Going back to this franchise, Kratos was the last Titan at one point, and then he wasn't. Which is why Kratos' reaction to learning about Kratos still being out there retroactively not make any sense, but isn't a writing flaw in this game if you just analyze this game in its original context. We start the game and immediately after get the coldest line in the whole franchise.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me.
We quickly learn that God of War is constantly looping back on itself, both in gameplay and in story, starting us at the end of our protagonist's life. We then learn through narration that this is Kratos, and that he has been serving the gods for 10 years, and that he has decided to end it all. We go back 3 weeks when Kratos is helping our boy Poseidon kill the Hydra. So God of War is only loosely based off Greek mythology. So a lot of characters and monsters from the myths appear in the series, but are reappropriated for this original story. I have no problem with elements being different here than in the myths, since the game had no intention of being a faithful recreation of them. Now, if this was the second game in the series, and the first one went out of its way to be faithful to the source material, then that would be a different story. But since that's not the case, I don't care that Kratos handles the Hydra instead of Heracles, nor that he kills the immortal main head, nor that it's a sea monster when it's not in the original myth. There are some women that are locked away asking for help on the boat, so Kratos retrieves the key from the captain, but doesn't save him. Some people have speculated as to why. I always took it as, since he is a coward and a weakling, Kratos views his life as worthless. At least that's how I think a Spartan would view such a person, especially a male. Especially since he's supposed to be the leader here, yet he is just yelling and running around like an idiot while his men die around him. So yeah, fuck him. He also locked away the women that needed help. You could say he did that to protect them, which makes sense, but why is there a door that only unlocks from the outside? It's not like this is the brig. Very strange. He didn't even leave someone in there to protect them. Turns out Kratos has been serving the gods for 10 years now. And he does so because he has some troubled past that haunts his every waking moment. He frustratingly asks Athena when he will be set free, since he is in the service of the gods specifically so they can help him calm his mind.
Athena! 10 years, Athena. I have faithfully served the gods for 10 years. When will you relieve me of these nightmares?
She reveals his final task is to go to Athens and defeat Ares, the god of war, who is wrecking the place with his army. The other gods can't directly stop Ares under Zeus's law because they can't go to war with each other. Athena reasons that Kratos actually has a chance of doing this since he has been trained by a god. We then get the most sneaky shit the gods ever pull on our boy.
And if I am able to do this, to kill a god, then the visions, they will end?
Complete this final task, and the past that consumes you will be forgiven. Have faith, Kratos. The gods do not forget those who come to their aid.
We'll get to that at the end. After the gals try to help us forget our past, we get to Athens, and it's in a dire state. The first two people we meet die right in front of us, and same with the next two. Things are so messed up that even Medusa herself is here. I'm not sure if Ares brought her here to use the other Gorgons in his invasion, or if Aphrodite did so that Kratos could kill her. Doesn't really matter because she's dead now. After making our way downtown, we run into the Oracle of Athens, or at least a magical hologram of her. She says she can help us on our quest. We then see the man himself, and it's revealed that Kratos and Ares have some history.
God of war, I haven't forgotten you. For what you did that night, this city will be your grave.
It also seems like Kratos has a reputation.
I know who you are. I know what you've done. Monster.
Wait!
Stay back! Get away from me!
A very bad reputation. The few people we see recognize him don't want anything to do with him.
I know who you are, Spartan. I know what you've done. I would rather die than be saved by you.
Making our way further into the city, we run into the other big man himself, who gives us his lightning bolts.
You have done well, Kratos. Go with the gods. Go forth in the name of Olympus.
Which we use to kill this guy to eventually get to the Oracle, who gets kidnapped right in front of us. On our way to save the lady, we come across this inconspicuous old man that doesn't sound like Zeus at all. He says some crazy old man type shit, and then we kill him because Kratos responds with immediate and extreme violence to every insult he comes across.
He responded to every challenge or insult he encountered with immediate and extreme violence.
A grave? In the middle of a battle? Who will occupy it, old man?
You will, my son. Oh, I've got a lot of digging to do indeed. All will be revealed in good time. And when all appears to be lost, Kratos, I will be there to help.
Oh wait, that doesn't happen. After just barely saving the Oracle from death, she reads our mind and more of Kratos is revealed to us. Turns out that Kratos was a captain. Let me say that again. Captain. In the Spartan army, who was very good at his job and was very ambitious, quickly growing his influence by being extremely effective, which in turn means violent. His wife seemingly being the only one that could tell him what for. She asks him to stop, but he seems more interested in the glory of Sparta.
How much is enough, Kratos? When will it end?
When the glory of Sparta is known throughout the world.
The glory of Sparta. You did this for yourself.
His desire for conquest knew no bounds, but that which he desired would ultimately consume him.
I've always interpreted this scene as the Oracle seeing the full picture where we are just seeing a small piece. She is very put off by this, but she still helps because he is the only one that can save the city. We are told that the only way of killing Ares is with the use of Pandora's box, which lies in a desert outside of Athens. We are warned that many people have gone in search of this thing and nobody has ever come back empty-handed, because they never come back at all. After getting to the desert, Athena tells us it's the most powerful weapon a mortal can wield and gives us more details about its whereabouts. The thing is past the Desert of Lost Souls inside a big-ass temple chained to the last Titan, Kronos. After pulling a Moses, Kratos climbs Kronos for 3 days straight. Now that's some real Alpha Chad shit right there. We talk to the person in charge of letting people in the temple. The manual says that he was the first to attempt to retrieve the box, and that the gods punished him for his failure by making him both the gatekeeper and the body burner. He tells us that the gods placed the box inside the temple to stop any mortal from being able to reach it. He straight up tells us that we were going to fail, but then he lets us in anyways. After fighting some enemies, we see this book in the entrance that reads, "This temple was erected in the honor and at the command of the mighty Lord Zeus. Only the bravest hero shall solve its puzzles and survive its dangers. One man will retrieve ultimate power. All others shall meet their doom. Pathos Verdes III, chief architect and loyal subject of the gods." There is a parallel story being told in the background once we reach the temple that is told primarily through these book entries. Although not nearly as developed, it is reminiscent of the Tales of the Black Freighter comic that runs parallel to the main story of Watchmen, but I'll dive deeper into it once we're done with the recap. Now, the story at this point takes a massive break. Comparing this to Zelda again, this is similar to what happens in Ocarina after you get to the adult section of the game. The story greatly slows down. There will be a few bits and pieces here and there, but for the most part, it's all gameplay. This isn't inherently a bad thing. The nature of the way the story is being told means that it isn't heavily dependent on pacing the way other stories are. Our next bit of story tells us of when Kratos met his match at the hands of the barbarians, which completely decimated the Spartans. We see Kratos about to meet his end when he cries out to Ares.
Ares! Destroy my enemies, and my life is yours.
That desperate call for aid would come to haunt Kratos for all his days.
By the gods, what have I become?
After a lot, and I mean a lot, of temple exploring and challenge beating, Kratos solves the grand puzzle that was the temple up to that point. We even get a shot of the body burner looking up at us, and although we don't get to see it, we all know that he probably feels pretty stupid about what he said earlier. This is several hours of gameplay removed from our first encounter with him, so this little detail really puts things into perspective. We were told that we were going to die like everybody else, and now we have made it further than anybody else has. We then see what occurred after Kratos called for Ares' help. Swearing his allegiance to Ares, the barbarians were quickly dealt with. Kratos was given the Blades of Chaos, which serve as both a weapon and as a physical representation of the deal. Kratos easily kills the barbarian leader, but the narration informs us that he would learn the cost of such power, a cost that was ultimately too high.
But soon, he would learn the true cost of such power. A cost too high even for Kratos to pay.
Wretched beast! I know who it is you serve. Return to your master. Tell the god of war I am his no longer. Tell him he is not safe while I walk the earth. I will find Pandora's box, and I will use it to see him tremble and fall before me.
After going through the cliffs of madness, which is where I said the game starts to get difficult, we start to get glimpses of what Kratos was made to do under Ares' command. Where previously we saw Kratos engaged in combat in a war setting, we now see him targeting civilians. The narration does mention his victories against actual armies during this time period, but we don't get to see any of that. This explains why those two were so disturbed by Kratos. It's one thing to be known as the guy that conquers his enemies with great effectiveness on the battlefield, it's another thing entirely to be known as the guy that kills civilians because Ares owns your soul now. One of these excursions leads him to a temple of Athena. His men burn down the surrounding village and kill all the inhabitants, while Kratos stands outside the temple. The narration tells us that he had a bad feeling about it. The temple's oracle warns him of the dangers that are inside. It was ultimately his ambition for conquest that led him inside.
But the village oracle's warning fell on deaf ears. His ambition would not be denied. All who opposed him would die. In that instant, the glory he had reveled in turned to horror. The image of his two final victims would stay with him for all his days. With that act, Kratos knew he could no longer serve his master. He had but one calling now, the death of Ares. He would murder the god of war.
Ares, you will die for what you did that night.
We will come back to this clip later. After a few more challenges presented by the temple, Kratos finds the body of Pathos Verdes III with a note explaining that he killed his wife because she tried to stop him from constructing the temple. The manual says that it is believed that he is still alive in the temple, continuing the construction of it to appease the god's commands. So his death is a reveal of sorts. After going through the game's worst combat encounter, we get to our goal, Pandora's box. Athena astral projects to congratulate us. Like I mentioned before, God of War likes to loop back on itself, both in story and gameplay. Turns out that the box was right at the entrance. Technically, not really. Ares, being a god and all, senses that Kratos has gotten the box, and decides to do some god-level shit, and tosses a giant spike at Kratos all the way from Athens across the desert and directly into his chest. I'm just gonna let this next bit play out.
As the life began to leave Kratos, his thoughts returned to that fateful night. Even in death, the memories, the visions would not fade. For how could he forget spilling the blood of his own family? A cruel trick orchestrated by the god of war.
My wife, my child, how? They were left in Sparta.
You are becoming all I'd hoped you'd be, Kratos. Now, with your wife and child dead, nothing will hold you back. You'll become even stronger. You will become death itself.
But as the flames consumed the temple, Kratos realized his true enemy was the god who once saved his life. The same god who had now taken everything from him.
Ares!
From this night forward, the mark of your terrible deed will be visible to all. The ashes of your wife and child will remain fastened to your skin, never to be removed.
And with that curse, all would know him for the beast he had become. His skin white with the ash of his dead family. The ghost of Sparta had been born. In the end, in death, he had failed. As the minions of Ares claimed Pandora's box, Kratos' life faded, and his cursed soul was cast into the fires of Hades. And Kratos fell into the underworld, the river Styx beckoning below, the currents strong enough to carry even the strongest mortal to his eternal resting place. But Kratos had no intention of resting yet. He intended to live, to return to Earth and complete his quest.
Let go, fool! You won't drag me down to that cursed river!
There is a task left for me above. I will see it completed.
You again?
It's well known nowadays that Kratos killed his family, but it's actually a late game reveal here. This is why I decided to recap the story this way and not chronologically. It's why I despise those cutscene compilations or those story of videos that tell the story in chronological order, because it's specifically meant not to be told that way by design. Kratos is now in Hades, where we meet the boat captain again. We have to make our way out. But how? How can a mortal make it out of Hades? Seems pretty convenient for our protagonist to just be able to get out of there, huh? Guess again, bucko. We get help from the gravedigger from before. But who is this old man? It's Zeus. How do I know this? Well, same voice actor for one, and he implies he's a god, so yeah, it's kind of obvious.
Who are you? Now that is an interesting question. But for now, you must hurry. Athens needs you.
But how did you know I would?
Athena isn't the only god keeping watch on you, Spartan. Complete your task, Kratos, and the gods will forgive your sins.
We get to where we left the Oracle, and she seems to be in pretty bad shape.
Kratos, return, but too late. Ares has taken Athens. There is no more hope. No hope.
Regardless, though, we continue forward.
Kratos had traversed the desert of lost souls, bested the deadly traps of Pandora's temple, and escaped Hades itself. There was but one task left.
Zeus! Do you see now what your son can do? You cast your favor on Athena, but her city lies in ruins before me. And now, even Pandora's box is mine. Would you have me use it against Olympus itself? Kratos, returned even from the underworld. Is this the best you can do, father? You send a broken mortal to defeat me, the god of war?
After thousands of years, Pandora's box was finally opened. The power of the gods unleashed.
You are still just a mortal. Every bit as weak as the day you begged me to save your life.
I am not the same man you found that day. The monster you've created has returned to kill you.
You have no idea what a true monster is, Kratos. Your final lesson is at hand.
The first phase of the Ares boss fight, in my opinion, is a step down from the Minotaur fight. Whereas in that fight, I felt that players that truly engaged with the game's combat mechanics could easily be able to dominate the boss. Here though, I can't help but think that things are just too chaotic to do so. The camera angle isn't the best for properly viewing them either. He hits like a truck too. The checkpoint is set right before the cutscene for some reason, so every time I fail, I have to do the roll of shame back to the fight. This is a point in the game where I do feel like it's supposed to be more spectacle than actual substance. You can beat this phase rather quickly by spamming magic. And just like the other bosses, Ares can give off a lot of health and magic if you hit him enough in quick succession. It's honestly kind of fun to use all of your arsenal against him, because yeah, that would happen in this kind of scenario. You have acquired all this power, all these tools along your journey. Of course you would use them all to stop Ares. Also, this is one part of the game where Zeus's fury is rather useful. If you don't knock him out of this state fast enough, he'll start launching meteors at you. Once you get him low enough on health, you can go and activate the QTE. But if you don't immediately start mashing circle, he's gonna counterattack and it will kill you. I don't like this. You should be punished for failing a QTE, but the punishment shouldn't be death. Especially now with this short of a window. You get a lot of red orbs and a refill on your Rage of the Gods meter after doing it successfully though. Word of advice, don't even try doing the next section of the game if you aren't at full magic. Ares opens this portal to God knows where, and well...
I have taught you many ways to kill a mortal, Kratos. Flesh that burns, bones that break. But to break a man's spirit is to truly destroy him. Do you recognize this place, Spartan? The location of your greatest failure? Perhaps there is a chance you can undo the deeds of the past.
The nightmares that had haunted Kratos for the past 10 years had now taken form and substance. His past stood before him.
Kratos! What's happening? Where are we?
By the gods, can this be real?
There is nothing you can put in my way to stop me. I will save my family.
This is the final combat encounter of the game, dubbed the Clone War by fans. It is possibly the most difficult challenge in the entire series. You have to fight off and stop evil versions of Kratos from killing your family, and I believe there are 100 of these guys in total. It starts off with you trying to keep them away from your family, but it will quickly devolve into you trying to kill them as fast as possible because they can spawn right in front of them. This is why starting the fight with a full bar of magic is so important. Army of Hades helps a lot here. Poseidon's Rage is also pretty good, but Army of Hades. It's also really important to have full Blades of Chaos upgrades so you can get infinite magic with Rage of the Gods, because you're gonna need it. Also, square, square, hold square? Almost impossible to beat this without it. You can control the battlefield pretty well with this thing. Mess up a little bit too much though, and it might be impossible to recover. It doesn't take much for you to go from 100% in control to, oh, they killed her again.
I couldn't stop them. They were too strong.
Now, once they start taking damage, you can press circle to hug them and give them some health back at the cost of your own. This also fills up your rage meter a bit, so if you can take advantage of that, then great. I never could though. The clones aren't too difficult to take out, but the ones that have the Blades of Artemis seem to be a bit more tanky. There's also the one that's in the back that's throwing at us what I assume to be Satan's Fury. You know, instead of Zeus's Fury, it's Satan's Fury, yeah. Smart. Which can sometimes hit the family. The island will get smaller at one point, so falling off is indeed a possibility, but not something that you really have to worry about that much. Getting grabbed is also a possibility, which is actually kind of good because throwing them off means that you have a chance of hitting other enemies. Oh, and if you didn't think this area was hard enough already, I'm pretty sure collisions don't really work here. With the exception of the grab throw thing. If it's your first time playing, you might be here for a long time. Even once you know what to do in theory, putting it into practice isn't that easy. Now, I could mention the fact that more advanced players manipulate the spawns of the Kratos in a way so they won't get overrun. Since there are specific Kratos that cause the spawning of multiple ones when killed, you're probably going to notice this for yourself if you fail and have to restart enough times, since there's a pretty obvious one at the beginning. I understand this is pretty much a mandatory method for completing this section if you're doing a challenge run, but for a vanilla run, I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you go about it in this way. This is perfect integration of story and gameplay. The fact that this is challenging makes sense from both a literal and emotional perspective. This is the hardest thing that Kratos has ever had to do. Again, both from a literal and emotional perspective. Ares taunting us at the beginning, telling us that we might be able to actually save our family, it's the icing on the cake. We all know it's not possible, including Kratos. But damn, he's gonna try. Because for the last 10 years, he's been trying to right the wrongs he has done, trying to obtain inner peace, trying to seek redemption, fighting with his inner demons, in this case, literal evil clones of himself. It should be difficult. It should be a little unfair. Not this kind of unfair, but still, you should be on the back foot. You should feel stressed about your wife and daughter getting killed again. You should have to give it your all. You should find the time in the battle to hug them because, well, to give them health back, but more importantly, to Kratos, it's been 10 years since he's been able to do this. This whole thing should be exactly how it is. Hardest encounter in the series? Possibly. I have yet to play all the games, so I don't know. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Okay, maybe I would fix the glitch that has him like grab you twice in a row, and it really just wastes my time. But other than that, it should stay the same. I say this as someone that took about 3 hours to beat on very hard. I would have beat it a lot sooner if I started with a full thing of magic, but you know, hindsight. This is my favorite part of the whole series. It's my favorite for being both the best story bit, while also being actual gameplay. It also felt really good beating this on very hard after so many attempts. Wait, what? That's it? That's it? No way! No way! That was what? What?
Had done the impossible. He had saved his family.
Kratos, please take us home.
Do you see, God of War? You took them once, but you'll never have them again.
You cannot save them, Kratos. You gave them up in your quest for ultimate power. There is a price to pay for everything you gain.
Not that price. I didn't want them to die.
No price is too high for what I offered. And you rejected me. A god! Now, you will have no power, no magic. All that is left for you is death!
Oh, not again.
You should have joined me, Kratos. You should have been stronger.
By the gods.
The battle was not over. The gods, it seemed, had a final gift for Kratos.
I still have allies in Olympus, Ares. Now, you will see how strong I am.
The second Ares fight is possibly the thing I hate the most out of the whole series, is what I would have said if I didn't play through the game again on hard while writing the script, and then again on very hard after writing the script. I'm ad-libbing that part. On paper, it's an interesting idea, both sharing a health bar. Sort of a tug-of-war kind of thing here. Only on paper though, because Ares can one-shot you at the beginning of the encounter. And even if it doesn't end up killing you, there's no point in not resetting at that point because you'll end up with more health after it. And this is because your damage output isn't equal to Ares. This thing might make you think that things are balanced here and that it's up to the player's skill to beat it, but no. Not when Ares has this attack that isn't blockable, that gets followed up by this, which, hilariously enough, I'm kind of jokingly named after this attack now.
Can the Mexican be an attack? His little fire burst into million stab can be the Mexican.
Mr. Wright is looking for names to attacks. And the IJP Mexicans. Hit him with the Mexican real quick.
The poof attack, yes, that can be the Mexican. He runs up, hits you with the Mexican twice, and you're dead.
Imagine Ares hitting you with the Mexican.
Could not be said.
The hardest blicky.
For as he sought to rebuild his...
You don't want to be the worst attack.
That's, you did really, really well. Especially against the Mexican right there at the end.
It took a minute to get used to how much the Mexican fucks.
I find that really funny because I fucking hate that attack so much. The Blade of the Gods is a neat weapon that has a unique moveset. They don't really matter though, since you can only use this weapon in this fight, and nothing is better than hitting R1 to stab, and then hitting square to do the spin attack, which you want to do when he's blocking to activate this struggle session, because this is how you're going to be doing most of the damage in this fight. Ares will do this teleport then summon rocks to crush you move. You can use this as an opportunity to get close to him and do some damage. I've seen people get him in this loop to beat him pretty quickly. That still doesn't negate the fact that doing an attack that, from essentially full health, can bring you lower than your starting health is bad design. Like I mentioned before, there is no reason why you shouldn't just reset at that point. Because the time it would take you to get back to your starting health is longer than the time it takes you to hit the select button and hit restart from last checkpoint. Where the Clone War was difficult, it was still reliant on the normal combat mechanics. At no point could one unblockable attack take out all of your health. No, you fucking piece of shit. Look how much, such a fucking bullshit attack though. The only reason why I'm not going harder on this is because, again, I played it again and I beat him in only 3 attempts. So if you know how to do the fight, it isn't too hard. It's still just not good. It's not well designed. If we count the 2 separate phases as one fight, I still rank this lowest out of the 3 in the game. I don't think counting the clone section as part of the fight is fair. If we count that as its own fight, I'd say it's lower mechanically than the Minotaur fight, but still wins over the other ones. But again, that doesn't really count. Alright, let's finish this.
Remember, Kratos, it was I who saved you in your time of greatest need.
I haven't forgotten, Ares. I remember how you saved me.
That night, I was trying to make you a great warrior.
You succeeded.
Kratos had done the impossible. A mortal defeating a god. Ares was no more. The city had been saved and would thrive again. The same could not be said for Kratos, for as he sought to rebuild his soul with the help of the gods, the truth was revealed to him.
Athena, rid me of the memories that haunt me still.
You have done well, Kratos. Though we mourn the death of our brother, the gods are indebted to you.
We promised your sins would be forgiven, and so they are. But we never promised to take away your nightmares. No man, no god could ever forget the terrible deeds you have done.
In the end, knowing the visions of his past would never leave him, Kratos made his way to the bluffs overlooking the Aegean Sea.
The gods of Olympus have abandoned me. Now there is no hope.
And Kratos cast himself from the highest mountain in all of Greece. After 10 years of suffering, 10 years of endless nightmares, it would finally come to an end. Death would be his escape from madness. The fate of Kratos was not as it seemed. The gods had other plans. Borne aloft like a feather, Kratos found himself risen from the sea and placed on solid earth.
You will not die this day, Kratos. The gods cannot allow one who has performed such service to perish by his own hand. Ares' tactics were brutal. His path of destruction had to be stopped. But now there is an empty throne in Olympus, and a new god of war is needed. Take these stairs, Kratos. They lead to your ultimate reward.
We get Athena's blades, which the game never makes clear whether these are entirely separate from the Blades of Chaos, or if they are simply the blades now having been blessed by Athena. I subscribe to the idea that they are the same. They were originally a sign of his loyalty and deal to Ares, but now are a symbol of his loyalty to the gods, his victory against Ares, and to his new godly status. We don't see much of Olympus, but what we do see is kind of nice, especially compared to the other environments in the game. Our throne is surrounded by the bosses we have defeated, which is kind of cool, but also a little strange. Like, Athena just said they were sad about Ares having to die, but there's a statue of him alongside the other foes that Kratos has slain? Okay. Do not pause here until you have saved, by the way. The game really likes to softlock in this area. Happened to me the first time I beat the game, which means that I had to beat it again after that happened, which sucked. But anyways, now that we saved, there's no risk of the game softlocking and us just being effed over. Let's pause. And it's softlocked. All there is to do now is to sit on that throne. So let's do it.
And from that point forward, throughout the rest of time, whenever men rode forth to battle for good cause or for evil, they did so under the watchful eye of the man who had defeated a god. They were driven forward by Kratos, the mortal who had become the new god of war.
I mean, the ending gets retconned in the next game, but for the time being, Kratos is the new god of war forever and always, and reaps the benefits of being a god of Olympus. What is this story about? Ignore all the things you know about the rest of the series. Ignore all your preconceived notions about Kratos as a character. Based solely on this game, what is this story about? If you say it's a story about a man seeking revenge, I'm sorry, but you've missed the point entirely. A lot of people will say that the flashbacks are just backstory. The flashbacks are just as much of the main story this game is trying to tell as the present day things are. Hell, if the other thing was true, then the whole game must be backstory, since we start here and then go back. Is a large part of the Odyssey just backstory, since Odysseus is retelling events that took place in the past? No, it's part of the story. This story is trying to emulate a Greek tragedy, and although it doesn't fit the definition perfectly, it gets close enough to what we think of as a tragedy to work. This story is about a man seeking redemption. He is in service of the gods willingly in an attempt to obtain forgiveness, and ultimately does, but it's not what he was expecting. He was tricked by clever wording. If this story is about revenge, then this doesn't matter. Why should it? He got what he wanted, right? He killed Ares. Why is it that killing Ares is given less attention to the nightmares then? Because it's not about killing Ares. It never was. That's not what he was after. It's simply poetic justice that his final mission is to kill the man that caused his suffering, and doing so will relieve him of said suffering, or at least that's what he thought. This isn't the story of Kratos thinking that he would feel some sort of catharsis after killing who he believed to be the responsible for his pain and suffering, only to realize that it didn't and that he might be more responsible for his pain than he thought. We do end up getting that story, but not here. Kratos knows exactly what's going on. He knows he turned into a monster and is responsible for what he has done. He still resents Ares, but that's more for literally moving his family from where they were to where Kratos would eventually be, not for making him do it. Pay attention to the narration here.
But the village oracle's warning fell on deaf ears. His ambition would not be denied. All who opposed him would die.
Ares didn't force him to go in there. Kratos did so of his own pride. There are no consequences for Kratos disobeying Ares. Not in this game. Not in this story. Get that shit out of here. At the end of the day, Kratos is at fault, and he knows it. After the release of God of War 3, all the different directors were present at a live event. They were asked what they each learned from Kratos. David Jaffe, the director of this game, had this to say.
I can tell you exactly. I mean, God of War is about a guy who, God of War 1, is about a guy who puts everything aside for his ambition for work. And he loses his wife, and he loses his kid. And, you know, that's all I need to say about that, so.
I don't see enough people talking about this aspect of the story. This might be an even more central theme than the redemption aspects. His wife asks him to stop. He says once the glorious Sparta is known throughout the world, his wife rightfully calls him out for it, telling him that he's doing it for his own selfish reasons. He doesn't stop and eventually meets his match, having to rely on Ares to save him. He is made a servant of Ares and is directed to be even more of a brutal warrior than he was before, which ultimately leads to the death of the innocent and of his family. Now you might say that the battle with the barbarians wasn't his fault, that they tried and simply failed, through no fault of his own. Well, not really. If he would have stopped like his wife wanted him to, then he wouldn't have been in that position in the first place. Now this is only speculation on my end, but perhaps the barbarians only became interested in attacking the Spartans because of the popularity Kratos had received due to all of his feats as a captain. He might have simply drawn too much attention to himself, or bit off more than he could chew. He prioritized his work over everything else, and loses his family and himself because of it. You know why I know this is a more central theme to the game than anything else? Pathos Verdes III. He is a reflection of Kratos. He is tasked by the gods to build the temple that will contain Pandora's box. He does so, and is so dedicated to the task, that it ends up claiming the lives of his sons, his wife, and his own. His sons become literal keys to the temple. Even after death, they are made to serve the temple, and in turn, their father's ambition. Reading the books throughout the temple, we see how things start to get worse, and how Verdes' fate in the gods fades. He ends up killing his wife because she told him to stop. His pride got the better of him. He ends up taking his own life afterwards, which is what Kratos ultimately tries to do. This shows a competency and storytelling that, to get ahead of myself a bit, is lacking from the rest of the trilogy. Like, they even hit the beat where the hero dies and has to escape the underworld. If you know anything about storytelling, you know why this is here. Like I mentioned before, Kratos knows he's at fault, despite people claiming otherwise.
Kratos doesn't seem to have any self-awareness or willingness to meaningfully self-reflect at all.
Yeah, totally not self-reflecting at all.
By the gods, what have I become?
Just a rage monster that splits people in half at the slightest insult. Hey, here's a good question. Why does this sequence exist? Why are a bunch of evil clones of himself attacking his wife and child, and not a bunch of normal-sized Areses instead? Could it be that Kratos knows he's a monster here? Why is he trying to fight off that part of himself? Nah, it's probably because he likes to smash things, right? A real story would have Kratos talk his way out of this situation, I bet. We need Kratos to self-reflect more, even though a reasonable person can note the difference in temperament between current-day Kratos and past Kratos. Current-day Kratos is a lot more subdued in his actions, and past Kratos is a lot more brazen, which would indicate that some self-reflection, and thus change, has taken place. You know, character development. I mean, since the game doesn't explicitly tell the player that this is a visual representation of the inner conflict Kratos is going through, and has been going through for the last 10 years, I guess it's just meaningless button mashing. Oh, what's this? A scene in where Kratos acknowledges the central theme of the game?
You cannot save them, Kratos. You gave them up in your quest for ultimate power. There is a price to pay for everything you gain.
Not that price. I didn't want them to die.
That the acquisition of power and recognition is not worth sacrificing your family and humanity for? And the main antagonist tells them that he is wrong? And that there's no price too high for such things? But Ares is a shallow villain, he sucks. He is what Kratos would have become if Kratos didn't have a fucking conscience. It's unfortunate that it took Kratos killing his family to really grasp the gravity of the situation, but at least then he understood that he had to stop. If he is as shallow and a piece of shit character as you would indicate, then why the fuck did he stop? Shouldn't he have just kept conquering, just not under Ares' command, and perhaps even in opposition to him? Killing his family isn't the only thing he regrets from his past, since we see his other brutal acts from before Ares even entered the picture in his nightmares. But the sex minigames. This game is juvenile. God of War 4 was unprecedented. Yeah, thanks for helping perpetuate the negative stereotype that this game has to deal with. 300,000? Yeah, I'm lucky if this gets a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 at best. The real tragedy is that his family had to die for him to see the truth. And it's also the fact that he got tricked by the gods. But you can argue that becoming a god of Olympus actually made things better. Of course, we ultimately know that that's not the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if most people back in the day saw this as an absolute win for Kratos. Now, there is this one line from the narrator that kind of throws a wrench into things.
With that act, Kratos knew he could no longer serve his master. He had but one calling now, the death of Ares. He would murder the god of war.
The rest of the game shows no indication that Kratos' goal after this point was to kill Ares. If anything, it was peace of mind he was searching for. I've already explained this in another video that you probably already have seen, so I'll just say this. This is the one time the writers drop the ball here, and it opens the door for future games to characterize Kratos' motivations as always being revenge, when that's just wrong. I like this story. It's pretty simple, but here's a little secret. Most video game stories are fucking garbage. I'll take simple but good over complex, fake deep, and bad any day of the week. It's sad to say that I don't think the series would ever get this good again. Not to say that there aren't good elements in future game stories, but overall, they aren't as well constructed. God of War 4 will be the next time Santa Monica showed a similar level of competency in their storytelling. Might be strange to some, because I've seen a lot of people say that they think God of War 2 is an improvement in all regards, including story. It's not. But that's a topic for the next review. Overall, I think Dark Odyssey does a pretty good job telling its story. That's the name of the game originally, apparently, which is a really fitting name for this story. If there was anything I could change about it, though, it would be this. Kratos should be motivated to keep fighting at the end, not just because he sees the sword, but because his wife and daughter encourage him to do so. Maybe have Hades show Kratos their souls in the dream sequence after Ares kills the fake wife. Then have them tell Kratos that they know he never meant to harm them, and that they forgive him. Because that is desperately what Kratos wants. Forgiveness. Now, that change works a lot better if this was a standalone game with no sequels, so I won't say that that's the right way to do things. It probably would undermine the tragic elements of the gods not removing his nightmares and whatnot. Lastly, I want to talk about Pandora's box and what's inside it. If you somehow manage to get this far into the video and don't understand that I'm analyzing the story in its original context, then you're going to point to God of War 3 for the answer of the question. I'm looking forward to covering that story in its respective video, but for now, let's stick to 2005. The game never outright states what's in the box. It is said to be a weapon, but we don't really know what that means in the literal sense. We know it's the most powerful weapon on Earth or in Olympus, that it can kill a god, and that the gods want it to be hidden so that nobody could ever reach it. Makes sense, right? Well, no, you're being had. Future context does what it always does and makes people think that the gods didn't want this thing to be opened by anyone ever. Sure, that's what the body burner tells us, and it might be what everybody believes, but think about it for a second. They had somebody construct a temple to house the box. While having the temple be difficult to traverse, it is still possible. From a lore perspective, it is one big puzzle to be solved. What is the benefit to having something that you don't want anybody to have still be obtainable? If they don't want anybody to reach it, then why have this guy open the gates for people that want to try? Hell, why even punish this guy for failing to obtain it? If nobody is supposed to get the box, then why do the gods care that he failed? Why are they called challenges? A challenge is supposed to be overcome. Shouldn't this be called the impediment of Poseidon? The roadblock of Hades? Why not have Pathos Verdes just dunk the box in lava? If it's powerful enough to contain the power to kill a god, I doubt it would be destroyed so easily. Better yet, why not have Pathos build a temple so that people that want to claim the box will try to do so and simply die, while also keeping the real box on Olympus. Oh, but then Ares would try to get the box and use it against Zeus. Ares could have just as easily gotten the box from the temple. He also doesn't need the box to achieve his goals. No. The truth is, the gods indeed wanted somebody to get the box, but only if they truly deserved and earned it. If you tell everybody that the temple is to stop anyone from getting the amazing power, then most people will take their word for it and simply stay away. But the more ambitious types will be intrigued and proceed to the temple. The body burner is there to deter them further, but once they're in, the book tells them that it's possible to obtain it. The temple isn't to keep the box away from people, it's a test to see who is worthy of its power. So, what's in the box?
What's in the box?
When Kratos gets it, he grows in size like the gods do, and the narration says it's the power of the gods.
The power of the gods unleashed.
This is the power to become a god. It's not too uncommon in Greek mythology for a mortal to become a god after a great trial or journey that proves their worthiness. The quest that Kratos goes on in this game is absolutely that. I believe it is logical to come to the conclusion that the gods set the whole thing up for a worthy warrior to achieve godhood and join them on Olympus. Now, no game in the series really answers the question exactly of how a mortal can become a god. What does it mean to be a god, or anything like that? Does having enough power simply make you a god? Do the gods have to declare you as one as well? I think that Kratos in this moment is exploiting a loophole. He hasn't been inducted into the Pantheon, so he is not a god, but he is as powerful as one, and therefore can do something about Ares without breaking Zeus's rule. It does bring up the question of how Ares would be able to use it against Olympus if he already is a god. Perhaps it would double his already existing power. Now, this is just speculation. I've been pretty logical in my assessments, and I'm not doing any kind of mental gymnastics to come to my conclusions. But the realist in me believes that Santa Monica probably didn't have a real answer to the question of the box.
What's in the fucking box?
What really is in Pandora's box? The same thing that's in the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. Nothing. Because it doesn't matter, really. It's a MacGuffin. Who is Pandora in this universe? Nobody. They used the name because it was a recognizable name from Greek mythology. All we need to know is that it lets our heroes save the day. It ultimately isn't as important as the rest of the story elements here. It does what it needs to do and nothing else. Curious people will obviously want a more direct answer, and the writers can handle this in two different ways. Completely ignore it and move on, or try to explain exactly what it is, how it works, how it came to be. Things can start to fall apart fast if you aren't careful. Giving an explanation that isn't well thought out can break the logic of the story, and recontextualization might outright contradict what was originally established. I won't have to talk about that for a few videos though. The only thing left to cover is the post-game, the challenge of the gods. Fuck the challenge of the gods. It's a gauntlet of challenges that ranges from simple, slightly amusing, to absolute bullshit. Here's some headcanon. After becoming part of the Pantheon, the gods had Kratos go through these challenges because they wanted to see just how capable he was. Kind of like how in the new games we hear about how the gods would essentially play with Baldur, shooting him with arrows just to see how long he could still be standing. It's like that, at least in my headcanon. Fuck the 10th challenge in particular. Killing enemies makes the platform go up. You gotta reach the other platform to beat the challenge. You like getting knocked back into the void over and over and over and over and over again? then this challenge is for you. This one is also fucking annoying because of how long it can be. Beating them unlocks additional costumes you can use in-game. They all give you different bonuses and are pretty silly, but you can't use them in very hard, the one place they would be worth using. There's a few more things you can get once you beat the game, like these short videos, which were the only indication of where the series could go from here. 2 of these would be the basis of what would ultimately come next chronologically in the series, but would be the second to last game in the original run. I'll actually hold off from discussing those until we get to Ghost of Sparta in like 3 years from now. Let's see how long it actually takes. I'll go over this one though, playing the whole clip.
The tale of Pandora's box remains to this day. After the weapon was taken from the temple, the structure endured. Kronos the Titan lived another 1,000 years, wandering the desert. That was long ago. The temple has gone silent, and the beast who bore it for so long has died. Relics of a world long past. But all myths need not be from the ancient times. Today, a band of explorers will make their way inside the just-discovered structure and find for themselves the temple still holds many dangers and many secrets. Soon, as with all great myths, a new hero will emerge.
This, combined with the message you can read at the entrance of the temple after getting the box, makes me think that perhaps they were thinking of making a spin-off game that took place in modern day, but I don't feel like looking this up because I'm a month into this process and I want to finish the video. God of War is not a masterpiece. It has too many flaws to be called one. Although many may say that most of the flaws I pointed out are minor, the devil is in the details. I don't think a game has to be flawless to be called a masterpiece, but basic stuff like keeping the blades consistent in the cutscenes, or Kratos' skirt existing, should be well kept. If you say I should only focus on the combat when judging how good the game is, well, that's dumb. A game isn't simply its strongest aspect, it's the whole package. I'm reviewing God of War, not its tech demo. Its subpar platforming doesn't take away from the combat, but it does worsen the overall experience. Its soundtrack has some great compositions, but it also has some tracks that are simply suitable, nothing more. Its enemy designs are well-rounded, but easily exploitable. Its puzzles are fine for the most part, but the temple itself feels like a grand puzzle. Completing it gives you the same level of satisfaction. It's littered with small inconsistencies. It has a decent voice cast, and what I would consider to be an above-average lead in T.C. Carson. Its story is simple yet effective. It has themes that tie together well. The series wouldn't achieve anywhere near such competency in its storytelling until 2018. Its bosses build off each other until they don't. There are a great variety of moves and overall options in combat, but the game just isn't very difficult once you know what you're doing, yet it still requires your attention. Yet, people misunderstand it, and help perpetuate negative stereotypes this series carries with it. They call it a watered-down version of DMC, yet you'll rarely see anyone play on the hardest difficulty when reviewing it. People seem to have a very reductionist view towards it. You can apply this mindset to anything though. DMC is just button mashing with roadblocks. See how stupid that sounds? They call it juvenile, yet completely misunderstands Kratos' motivation as petty revenge. I think I've been more than fair to this game, and I think it's fair to say that it's a good time, and yet, I haven't pulled any punches. I think my criticisms are well-fitting. Even though the sequel improves in a lot of aspects, they somehow managed to make this game not obsolete. There is still a reason to go back to play this over 2 and 3. If you haven't yet, give it a try.
I think whether you're into mythology or not, I think you can't deny the power of a game made by passionate people.
God of War is a game that anyone can pick up and play and have a really fun experience.
You should play God of War because it'll get you laid.
This is the adventure that the back of the box has always promised you.
God of War is fucking rad.
I am 35 pages into the script and I have no idea how to end this. If you've made it to the end, what's up guys, this is the IJP Mexican, aka Film. I have a few more reviews already on my channel, but nothing to this scale. I'm guessing that will change once I review the second game. I didn't at all think it would be this long. At most I was expecting an hour-long video like my BT3 review. As of writing this, I honestly have no idea how long it's actually going to be, but my BT3 review was 8 pages. Again, we're on 35 right now. Even as I'm saying this, I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to be. I've edited a lot of the video up to now, but I still have a good 10 pages to edit. I know it's at least an hour 30, but you know. A few years ago, I watched Metal Gear Solid 4 Was a Mistake, and I remember wishing I could make a video as detailed as that one. I don't think I've done it here, though. If anything, my God of War 3 video will be that. Its story definitely was a mistake, and I'm going to be framing it that way for the video. But I have to get to the second game and Chains of Olympus first. The other mistake. If you want more God of War content now, I have this video out. If you already know who I am, chances are you found me through this one. Production of this video set my Minecraft retrospective back several months, so I'm guessing I'll have that done by March, is what I wrote in the script, but I'm taking like a month break after this whole production, so April, June, something like that? I don't know. May? I got a few people I wanted to mention. Extreme Gameplays, or Zesty. A lot of the outside the norm combat things I learned because of him, like collisions and tricking. I know there's a few things of that sort that I didn't include in this video, and there's a good chance that he might have mentioned those things in the comments section, so take a look. He's also responsible for the success of some of my other videos, since he shared them with his audience. I don't say that to undermine the quality or the hard work I put into the video. It's just straight up true. They wouldn't have done nearly as well without him. So, thank you, man. Next is Patrician TV. If you've seen his Elder Scrolls videos, you could tell he was inspiration from the formatting of this video. Again, when I started making this thing, I didn't have in mind it was going to be this big, but when I realized it was going to end up being a lot bigger, then I reworked things and rearranged some things to make it better, hopefully. The intro, title cards, and even this outro are all similar to things he's done. I try to strive to make better content because of people like him. I tried pretty hard not to just be someone who made a long video and ultimately didn't say anything interesting. I think I managed to do so, but I'll just have to wait and see what people say about it, if anything. This is the last review we're doing in the classic location as well, so say goodbye. Peace. Leave a like, leave a comment. This was like a month. Yeah, usually I take like a weekend to edit my videos. I've been editing for more than a month. I've been working on this project for more than a month. So yeah, that's fun. You can hear my voice going. This was several recording sessions. And this last one is probably the longest, so let's wrap things up. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you hold down triangle, you'll launch the enemy into the air, and you will go up with them if you hold it long enough. I wonder if anybody commented about me forgetting that. Probably not, right? Probably not.
The city had been saved, and would thrive again.
I did that right as well. What the fuck, game? I mean, I clearly didn't, because otherwise it would have worked, right? Oh, what the hell? They can hit you while you're doing that?
Desde el volato vengo, dicen que nací en el roble. Me dicen que soy arriero, porque el ejemplo desampara. Si les saben los sombreros, ya verán cómo reparan. Ay, ay, ay. Ay, mamá, por Dios que borracho vengo, que me sigan la tambora, que me toquen el quelite, después el niño perdido, por último el torito pa' que vean cómo cómo me pinto. Ay, ay, ay.